Can you guys check your mics? Mine's on. No. Testing. Can you guys hear me back there? Is my mic on? Okay.
Hello, testing 1 2.
I can't hear the feedback from yours. Maybe you
Test.
turn them up a little bit. Because usually I can kind of hear when I'm talking. That's how I kind of tell. Okay. We got 1 minute to showtime. Yeah. No. It's been on everyone's agenda.
I'm sure we'll hear.
Let's do one
Well,
more.
and your poppies are beautiful in
Do
front of your
one
house.
more minute
They're
here.
spreading to Brian's house, and
Brian is very pleased with that. He told
yeah, we planted poppies in our backyard growing up, and in years we took over, and you just don't want to bother them.
Yeah, I'm amazed by the, believe it or not, the color
10 o'clock and
variation.
we're ready to start. Are you rolling in?
With the yellow ones.
Question mark.
Yeah,
Then you get the white ones occasionally, and it's like, how does that happen?
yeah, it's beautiful.
It is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And when I do that, then she shows up like, it doesn't even get the text, so.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and maybe we'll wait till we get to the. Okay, go ahead and flip on the light, and we'll get through adoption of the agenda and see where we go. Good morning, everybody, and I am going to call the meeting to order. This is Tuesday, May 7th. It is 10:01. This is our special meeting, budget workshop number 2 of the Elmville Town Council. And so with that, can we get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Reeves? Here. Councilmember McKee Cant?
Here.
Councilmember Knight?
Here,
Mayor Moore?
Here. And we're waiting on Councilmember Tripp. So we can mark her present when she comes. Thanks. Can we all stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Okay, so now I would like to get a motion to adopt today's agenda.
Move to adopt the agenda for May 7th.
Oh, second.
We have a motion by Reeves and a second by McKee Cant. We have a screen, and it says we're waiting.
A voice vote for this item.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstain? That passes unanimously. And now we see public. Thank you very much, public, for coming. Does the public have any public comment that is not on today's agenda? Seeing a smile and a head shake no, we are going to move ahead to item number 6, which is the budget workshop. And before I turn it over to Brad, who will introduce Celia. So what we're going to do today is we kind of go through it, and Brad will kind of give us some heads up. If you've got any clarifying questions, go ahead and hit your red light, and we'll call on you for that. And then there'll be stopping points for input and comments, and staff will also tell us about that. Okay, that seems to work. So, Town Manager, you want to get
Yes.
us going?
Okay, thank you, and good morning. This presentation is our second budget workshop, as you know, and we're going to focus on utilities and the capital improvement program. So I have Celia to my left, who obviously oversees administrative services and finance, and John Ferns to my right, who oversees our utilities and capital improvement program. So I will make a short introduction, turn it over to John, who will start with utilities and sort of walk through water and wastewater. We'll include the capital improvement request for those two functions or those two funds, and then we'll then get into the broader CIP discussion. So we can pause after each of the utilities. I think we can go through the whole CIP. Obviously clarifying questions if there's issues, and then there is a final slide. I'll come back. Celia will do kind of a final overview of the overall budget, and then there's a final slide that's trying to, in essence, get any final direction. So we'll get to that final slide after formal public comment, but I'll let you, again, you just tell me when to stop, and I'll answer any questions, or the three of us will. So with that, I'll start with the comments that were heard from the last workshop and things that have been incorporated into the budget that you have now. First, we did increase the election cost by $4,200 in order to cover the translation costs. Because there was a request to have some celebration for our 60th anniversary, which will be next February, we did include $20,000 into that. We haven't defined the use of that, but there was discussion about the 115 trusts and other post-employment benefits, or OPEB. We're suggesting that we push that to a future discussion. So if there's consensus to bring something back, that could be a study session or another item during a regular meeting. There was different thoughts and ideas around business and economic development, so we should have a further conversation. That is on the last slide as well. There was a request to distinguish the organizational chart between existing vacancies and new positions, so we've done that, and that's in the PowerPoint you'll see, so it's before you. It's also something we can post. That gets into the staffing levels and allocations. And then finally, I always want to show you this slide because I think this is the long-term forecast. This should always be in your mind as we talk about budgeting. We're only looking at these 2 years, but when you go beyond that 5 years, this is the 7-year forecast, which does get concerning in the future years if expenditures continue to outpace revenues. So that's what we're forecasting, but a lot of assumptions, of course, go into that. Most of our costs are personnel costs, so these are they're in your packet, so you can look at them. But you can see the color coding now, where purple and green are full-time, part-time positions that are filled. Red are existing vacancies, so positions that were already budgeted that are vacant that we are currently recruiting for. And then the yellow are the new positions that are being proposed in this budget. And then when we look at the second year, this is, as I've explained, more aspirational. And each year and really every, day, quarter, we're looking at staffing and we're, dealing with changes because, this is a constant state of change as people either retire or move on. And, we work hard to make sure that we're in the right place here. So the second year, although it's shown here, and it is in some degree budgeted, I would tell you when we get into our off-cycle budget, which I'll talk about, we'll definitely be before you annually to talk about staffing. Okay. And I'll have Celia kind of go through some of the changes based on information we've received since the last workshop.
Thank you, Town Manager. Apologies for my voice. So we did have to increase some of the liability insurance costs based on the projections that we get from CIRA, our risk pool. They did give us an updated estimate in April, right after the last workshop. So we did increase liability insurance, which also increased that second year because that is escalated based on a percentage increase. But we did decreased slightly the workers' compensation insurance, which also decreased the second year a bit. We added a $100,000 transfer from Fund 29, which is the Upper Valley Waste Disposal Franchise Fees Fund, to help support one of the projects in Fund 50 that you'll hear a little bit more about in a future slide. We increased Public Works Administration Department for conference and travel up for about $1,000 to allow for an employee to attend the GIS conference. And then based on some of the changes in the general fund, we did have to decrease slightly the transfers to capital projects by $25,000 in both fiscal years. So instead of $650,000 and $450,000, they were reduced to $625,000 and $425,000 in the 2 fiscal years into Fund 50 to support capital projects.
Thank you. Are there any quick questions in terms of changes?
Mayor, just when you get an opportunity to give us a copy of that organizational chart, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I think, Hillary, I know the printer was jammed. That's why
That's
we
all
were.
right. At some point.
Oh my
in the near
goodness.
future.
Okay, Benita will bring them in to the chambers once they're done. I just checked on them. It should be any moment now.
Thank you. That's fine. Thank you very much.
And we'll also have them available at the public table, and we'll make sure this is on our website later today. So next steps. So actually today at 3 o'clock we have our regular meeting. We do have on the agenda a proposed general fund reserve policy. So that is something we've talked about that you'll discuss and hopefully decide on today at 3 p.m. The May 21st budget adoption is expected during the regular meeting unless there's significant changes we hear today. So we're on pace. And again, I'll thank Celia. And Kyle's not in the room, but he's probably back there. Is he? Oh, you're right behind me, too.
Yeah.
That's all right. So, they've been doing a great job of keeping up. So I think we are on schedule to present a balanced budget on May 21st, again, assuming no significant changes. And then we've talked about the off-cycle budget. So this, because it's a 2-year budget, will be next year. And some of the things that we're looking at that, will require time and, and quite a bit of analysis is a cost allocation plan, first of all, which is something where it's almost like a fee study where a third party comes in, they look at the staffing, and they look at how those costs and additional costs are allocated across different funds. And this is required in some cases to charge against grants. Certain grants require a cost allocation plan in order to charge staff time. So we don't currently have one. So that would be a benefit if we were receiving grants. But also as we get into, the different funds, specifically utilities, which John's going to talk about, we try to estimate how much of John's time and other time is spent on water and wastewater. But that's, that's a challenging effort because it changes day to day depending on the circumstances. So having a cost allocation plan provides the justification so that you can make sure that you're charging those and that you're going to survive audits and the things that happen when people come in and look at that stuff. Internal service funds, I've mentioned. We don't formally have them here. We sort of informally do something similar with like our IT department where Jason's costs are sort of allocated across departments. So I would like to bring that back. And that gets into, when we talk today about funds 81 and 82, we're talking about scheduled or major maintenance. We're talking about fleet purchases for vehicles and equipment. Typically, that will be part of an internal service charge where, again, all the departments will be charged based on a methodology. And so rather than these being annual discretionary things, they're really part of a cycle. And it's typically like a 5, sometimes 10-year cycle. And it's just kind of ingrained in the budget versus something that is either discretionary or subjective each year. And it's really best practices because most of these things like major maintenance or scheduled maintenance for roofs and other things need to happen, or else you get what we refer to as deferred maintenance, and deferred maintenance then gets more expensive, just like your house. If you wait to do things, then it can be obviously much more impactful. So the intent is to do that over the next year, and that will provide a little more certainty for these types of things. We've talked about fees. We've talked about the master fee schedule. I tend to make a really important distinction between user fees, which are cost recovery fees that we use for lots of things. And then you have, which includes permits and things, but then you have impact fees. Impact fees are a different sort of bucket, and they intend to be, and you'll see one example of those with utility undergrounding. But in other cases, these are things that are intended to accommodate growth. Now, we don't have a lot of growth, so not a lot of new building permits, so it's really not significant. But it's important to understand that distinction. We are, and you'll hear a little today about ADA improvements. As you know, we're in the process of updating our transition plan, and I do think we need to have a deeper conversation about the transition plan and how to prioritize improvements. So we can talk about that a bit today, but I would propose that we do a deeper dive there, and that could be something that comes back as part of your off-cycle budget as well. And then finally, study sessions were something we established through our new protocols or through our handbook. And this is where, you need to direct me and we can start to look at the next fiscal year and what specific subjects we want to address during those less formal study sessions, and I think we kind of had that 1 o'clock start. And I think I mentioned like one a month is probably a good target. So that's that in terms of off-cycle budget. The big thing that, and I'll get into some detail today about the Yountville Commons or the school site purchase, but there will be needs for refinements as information comes forward and the community engagement starts. So know what you see today is an initial take at where we're, a snapshot in time where we are today. That will, because we've, I think, owned it 2 weeks. So we're working hard, but that will require refinements. And then finally, as you look through the fiscal year, and this is sort of, to me, the beauty of a biennial budget, next year during this time, we will be working with the council on goal setting and strategic planning. So this really gets into the idea vision phase of the Commons, where I do think we will need that much time to get to a place where we can present options to the council. We've also been directed through goal setting to talk about mobility or peds and bikes, as well as energy resilience or microgrids and things. So at this time next year, we hope to have plans that we can sort of use as guides for whatever decisions the council wants to make. And then finally, other things come up. This is life in Yountville. This is life in every municipality. Things come up and we need to react. So don't think that because you're adopting a 2-year budget, we stop budgeting or we stop talking about new things. But I think having the cycle and doing budgeting, which we're doing now, and we did obviously goal setting earlier, I think alternating between those just provides a good efficiency to the work we do. Otherwise, it gets to be tricky, and you don't feel like you're finishing things, and people feel like, what about this? What about that? I said this. I said, so all these things start to get mushy unless you can really kind of have a process that allows you to define things and then for the staff to do the work to hopefully implement. So that is mine, and I'm going to switch it over to John to get into utilities unless anyone has any question for me. On the drive.
No questions?
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm John Fernger, Public Works Director, and we are stepping into the Water Utility Enterprise Fund section of the presentation. This will be a combination of Director King and I sharing slides as we go forward. As a reminder, this budget session is kind of a follow-on to the budget session that we had previously in April. That one focused on the operational side of the general fund that, essentially is town hall. As a reminder, the water and the wastewater utility enterprises are separate from the general fund, and they operate separately, and the funds aren't interchangeable amongst all three. And the water and wastewater utility enterprises are a cost for service model, so the rate study that we adopt every 5 years assumes that we're collecting the amount that it costs to provide the service. We don't make any profit. We don't charge more than we can. And so this past few weeks, I've received questions about how the water and the wastewater funds will may be impacted by general fund decisions associated with purchases and things like that. And I remind everybody they're completely separate entities, and things that are happening in the general fund won't affect the wastewater fund and or the water fund. So with that, we'll get into the wastewater. We're starting with water. Sorry, the Water Enterprise Fund. And again, handing off to Celia. But this is as you know, we discuss operational and then capital improvements. So we're starting off in the operational side of things, and then we'll build into the capital side.
Thank you, Director Ferns. So some variables that are affecting the operating departments, and this is probably a familiar slide that you saw in the first workshop, talks about our total PERS costs, our 2.8% COLA that is scheduled for employees as of July 1, and then some increase to health insurance costs, and then contributions to the PRSP Trust and OPEB Trust. And also just a reminder that you may see some salary fluctuations in the departments based on how staff allocations have been changed. So if you do see a decrease in some salaries, it translates into an increase in another department as their time has been allocated differently. Next slide, please. This is a roll-up of all the water utility funds, so this is operating and capital. So this shows revenues over expenditures and then the transfers that are planned. And you can see that there is a small transfer from Fund 61, which is the water operating, into the water capital. The larger transfer into Water Capital Fund 60 is coming from the Utility Enterprise Capital Projects Restricted Fund, which will be talked about at a later slide. And it does show at the bottom that we are using a bit of fund balance, that excess deficiency after transfers. That is shown as a use of fund balance going forward.
I have a question before we get too far into this.
Yes.
It seems like you're talking about this one question that I knew was a Celia question. On my book, under aggregate water funds summary, at the bottom of that total column for 24-25, it shows, well, for all of them actually, it shows a negative amount. Is that what you're talking about, the transfer?
Yes, the transfers are right above, so that the page you're looking at is the slide that's on the PowerPoint right now. And it does show the transfers in and out. And at the bottom, you do see a negative amount, but that is not a deficiency as far as negative fund balance. That is a use of fund balance. So the funds still have positive fund balance, even though we're drawing down.
Oh, I see. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Mayor, quickly, would you like to use the request to speak system during this portion of the meeting?
Yeah, let's do that.
Thank you. Request to
You
speak.
can hit your red button. Yeah.
Okay, so this is that same information that we saw on the chart in a graph form showing revenues over expenditures. Obviously, expenditures are a bit higher. That's based on the projects that are slated for the next 2 years, and that's what's causing the use of fund balance. Next slide, please.
And if I think what also may help the council too. So we've just in 2022 we approved the 5-year rates. So sometimes when things look like they're going down, they do catch up in later years. So and we're not really kind of showing you the projections of how that's going to happen over those 5 years. We're just in the first year and 1 year and 2 years. So. When you see that kind of smooth out a little bit later. So over a 5-year period, we are projecting not to be in a deficit.
Thank you.
So coming back to the public works side of things, the water operation and distribution portion of this. We are estimating slight increases in the total budget for both fiscal 24 and 25. Some of that is based on the need for additional maintenance for the generator. Prior to the recent drought, the town's well was an emergency well, but during the drought it was upgraded to a municipal well. So the well operation has ramped up, and accordingly we've had to make sure the infrastructure to support that well is in place. So the increase that you're seeing here is to ensure that the generator is available for the well, as well as the pump station, as well as the wastewater pump station, the flood pump station, and the wastewater pump station. Our little pump station site is very complicated in that it has 3 significant public works components. It has the flood project, it has the clear water well, and it also has the wastewater pump station. So the generator that's there needs to be available or operate all 3 on a moment's notice. The other piece of this is we've increased our budgeted contract services for on-call water services. This is, we budgeted $25,000 previously, but we've used it and had to ask for more money. This is to have a contractor available to perform water repairs and or water projects above and beyond the skill level of our staff. And that doesn't mean our staff doesn't have the proper skill level. It's for replacement of a failed water meter. If we have a water leak, those types of projects we use an on-call service for. And so in the past we've bumped up and exceeded that $25,000 mark. And so we've budgeted in anticipation of that. And then we also, now that the well has become operational, in times when we are coordinating with Calvet and their water system will be turned off, we have the opportunity to use our well to augment our water supply instead of being 100% reliant on Napa. So the Napa water tends to be expensive. Using our well is less expensive, and now we have that as an option. So when times when Calvet lets us know that they're going to be offline, we bring the well online, and our customers, it's seamless. They don't notice the difference, but it's less cost than going straight to Napa water. And Napa water, or water purchases and conservation, this is essentially our agreement with Calvet to buy our water supply. On April 1st of every year, Calvet lets us know what our water supply will be in the coming year. We did receive our annual notice that we are not in a water emergency, so the 500 plus acre feet is available to us in the coming year. And a side note is that agreement is expiring this year, the water purchase agreement. We have a draft version that we're routing among staff that we anticipate to bring to council before the expiration date of that. So in a near-term council meeting, you will see that water agreement.
So are you saying that instead of in past years, which has always been frustrating to us, we have to use all the water for a year and then we get a bill that they're really actually going to project in April?
No.
The cost? That's not changing?
It's not, no.
Okay.
So the April 1st date is they're telling us what water volume will be available.
Just the volume, okay.
And the financial side of things will continue status quo.
Unfortunately, okay. Vice Mayor Tripp, do you have a question?
On the financial side, it's my understanding it's kind of a cost contract. So basically we do a true-up at the end of the year of what it costs them to provide the water.
That's correct.
Right. So we won't know that till after the year's finished, what their costs are in terms of operating it. And then, do you know the percentage of how they divvy up the costs? What percent they think is the town versus their use of the water?
We do get those allocations at the end of the year with the true-up, and I can provide that for last year.
Yes, it's like 50-50.
It's a little, the town is a little more than 50%, yeah.
But in general terms. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, the town uses more water than the vet's home campus. So in general, for the water production side of things, they produce more water for our use than they consume on their campus. So percentage-wise, we are a little bit higher.
And it's my understanding that, excuse me, this works the same way as the wastewater, where we're in, for lack of a better word, we're in charge, and we have the cost structure. And so we divide that up and bill them their part of the wastewater at the end of the year, correct?
Correct.
And then there's probably a true-up where we decide who owns what.
Correct.
And do you know in broad terms how the wastewater works? Is that about 50-50 too, or?
It's usually a little heavier on the veterans home side, so
Yeah,
maybe
I would guess that.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Knight has a question for you, John.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Ferns. I just had just a quick question. When you talk about when we get a notice from Calvet that Rector is down, what do you anticipate is the time for us to get the well up and running and supplying water to the town?
It's available, essentially, there's some electronic infrastructure that's being installed right now. The infrastructure that was installed in 2004, the electronic part failed. So the pump logic controller that allows us to operate the well is being replaced right now. Once that is replaced, it will be tied into our SCADA system, and it'll be fairly instantaneous that we can switch on and off via SCADA. Right now, it's the time that it takes for us to get the notice and drive down there and for our crews to operate the well manually and bring it online. So I would say 24 hours. So just to be safe, but in general, we can respond fairly quickly. Calvet in recent times has been much more upfront about scheduling. Not that they weren't upfront. They're better communicating their schedules. And so right now we know they have a repair pending at Rector Water Treatment Plant. So once they give us a schedule for that, we will plan accordingly and switch to the well so they can turn off and then we can be on the well. Our customers generally don't notice the difference when they switch from one to the other.
And Mayor, just one last question. So we don't have storage. So in the case where we're using well water, it'll just be continuous flow into our system, or
yes,
because we currently don't have any storage capacity.
The way our system is configured, the Napa portion of the connection is kind of an on-demand. So it's essentially if the pressure in our system drops below a certain point, Napa water automatically feeds, or if the demand that exceeds our well capacity, the Napa water will automatically feed the system. So during the drought, we ran the well 5 days a week during the day, and it was able to meet the demand. So in times of Rector being off, the lack of storage is not a problem because we have Napa to augment what our well can't supply in periods of peak flow.
Thank you.
Water Utility Capital Improvements Fund is also increased, and we have a slide that we'll talk about water projects, but we have roughly $690,000 worth of capital improvement projects scheduled for each of the coming years. And we'll get into that slide momentarily.
Councilmember McKee-Cant has a question.
Thank you. While we're on the subject of contract services and repairs, John, is it still last year's budget that's going to cover for the wastewater transmission line and the repairs for the river project? Or
that's in the wastewater enterprise, separate from the water enterprise. So even though it's recycled water, it comes out of the wastewater treatment plant or our water reclamation facility. So that one will affect the wastewater enterprise budget that we're going to talk about. And
services, that's totally separate.
Yes.
In that category.
Yes. Okay. Director King, I need some help with this slide.
Yes, absolutely. So this is the proposed usage of the Utility Enterprise Capital Projects Restricted Fund, which was established in October of 2022. And the town council at the time had determined that they would like to use some of the general fund unassigned fund balance to create this fund. and utilize it for capital projects in the future to help reduce the increase to water utility rates. We have not used it as of yet, but are proposing to use it in the next 2 fiscal years in the amounts shown up above to support the projects that Director Ferns was speaking about. So you'll see in your budget materials in the summary of fund balance activity for Capital Projects Fund 60. Without the influx from this restricted fund, the fund would not have enough capacity to pay for these projects. So utilization of this restricted fund would be necessary.
Moving on to the Water Drought Reserve Fund. This is the fund that we keep in place for times of drought, such as we just experienced. Fortunately, we didn't have to use it at that time because we had good water management and response by our customers, but it does remain in place, and we're not proposing it to use any of this money in this biennial budget for the next 2 years, but it is available for purposes of drought, and it was originally conceived, I believe, to be available to purchase additional water supplies in the event of drought or emergency, and those water supplies could be fed through the State Water Project, through the City of Napa's water system, to our connection with the Town of Yountville. And the water connection impact fee, we've discussed impact fees fairly regularly in the last year or so. These are fees that are charged to private development as they come through and get their building permits. Because of Yountville's lack of private development, the impact fees are unpredictable sources of revenue, and we typically don't budget for them. Historically, they've been less than $100,000, and they do get transferred into the Capital Improvements Fund 60 for use. And so moving into the capital improvement portion of the water enterprise, this is the first slide that you're going to see. It's all one color, but a theme for today that we're bringing forward is kind of a green color versus a red color. There's this idea of capital improvements versus scheduled maintenance or required projects or programs. And so the red color represents scheduled projects and or programs that we need to implement in order to operate the water enterprise. And so on this particular slide, you'll see all one color because these are all scheduled maintenance and or programs that are required to operate the enterprise. They're not a green slide where you'll see later on where a green slide is something that is above and beyond the normal operation of the water enterprise. And so the capital improvement budget that we referred to in a few slides ago is referring to these projects here. The water system intertie project, the first line item there for $120,000. We actually have two existing connections to the City of Napa water system. We rely on one regularly, but it's substandard, so we need to bring it up to current modern standards. We're working with the City of Napa on the design of that now, but it will be implemented. It's the one that we refer to as the Weber intertie, so it's at the intersection of Weber and Washington Street. There is an inoperable one at the corner of Washington and Mulberry that needs to be abandoned, and then in the south parking lot, there is a design for a modern intertie to their system there. For those of you that are familiar with that dirt lot that we refer to the south parking lot, there's a fire hydrant right in the middle of that. Mm-hmm. That fire hydrant is owned and operated by the City of Napa. It's in that vicinity that will create our new water system intertie. The replacement utility truck, it's important to note that based on the demands of the utility trucks themselves, the electric vehicle technology isn't such that it can support the vehicle that we're going to replace. So we are replacing a gas-powered vehicle with a gas-powered vehicle, but it's due to the configuration of the vehicle and the fact that electrical trucks aren't up to the standard of that particular truck. The active chlorine monitoring equipment of the well is to ensure that we are delivering the necessary quality of water out of the well to the system. The lateral lead testing and assessment one is an expensive item, and it's important to mention because that is a federal requirement that is coming down from the EPA, and what it is it's an order where the federal government is putting the onus of exploring and looking for any remaining lead fittings in the pipe network on the local water purveyor. So what that means to us is we, the town of Yountville, own and operate the water system, and our responsibility ends at the water meter. And we know that our system we've replaced all the lead fittings and pipes in our system. However, due to the age of our town, there's the potential for lead fittings to be after the water meter and before the connection to anybody's house. And that piece of it is what the federal government is putting on the local water purveyor to explore and identify if there's any remaining lead fittings in the system. The challenge for us is it's outside of our traditional point of responsibility, and as everybody knows, the water system is buried in people's front yards, so it is a challenging piece to try to determine what, if any, lead fittings remain after the meter and before somebody's house. And so we are working through that process to figure out how to best identify those fittings. And then once we identify them, it will be on the homeowner's responsibility to replace them, but the responsibility to identify them is on the water purveyor.
A question about that?
First, Councilmember Knight would like to ask a question.
Follow up to that question. So are they concerned after our water meter and before the house about backflow issues of, because it's not controlled until it gets to the house? Is that where it's lateral testing, lead testing? Is that?
It's not related to backflow. It's related to the lead. It's related to the lead fittings in the lines.
So they're just worried about resident being contamination, not necessarily an issue for you where there'd be some point where it would that contamination would backflow.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Tripp.
I think this comes out of all that problems in Detroit with lead and children, and it's such a high-risk thing. But my question is, if it's after the meter, does the town really own that piping or have control of that piping at all?
We do not.
Okay.
However, again, the federal
Right.
government has put it on us as the local authority, for lack of a better word, to explore and determine if there are any fittings that remain. And in Yountville, it's a bit of a challenge, but it's not as challenging as you might think because we know certain neighborhoods, Washington Park, for example, Vintage in the Oak Circle area, when those neighborhoods were built, lead fittings were already banned. So we can rule out neighborhoods and understand that based on the age of the neighborhood, we don't need to explore there. But given the age of some of our neighborhoods, we need to focus our exploration in those older neighborhoods that we can't just rule out based on when they were constructed.
Right. So my home, for example, I think was 58 or maybe 68. So I run the water a lot when I fill things
Yes.
for my 3-year-old granddaughter. But it seems like the only way to know that would be to test the water in the homes. Is that right?
We're working on it. Could be testing. It could be that there's various ways to do it. There is technology where we would disconnect the meter and you run a tiny camera through the line and look on the pipe from the inside. That's a little more expensive, and so we're exploring those options.
Do the regulations, and thank you, you know a lot about this, but do the regulations say you have to, how you go about this? In other words,
No, they just say, well, you need to figure it out.
I think the biggest challenge in the town is probably going to be with a lot of the old pipes. They're just now beginning to look at them at the veterans' home. So
Right.
those would be the biggest challenges, I think.
The next item on here, the rest of them are somewhat routine, but the next one that is important or that I should mention is the one that's labeled chlorine residual monitoring PRVs, Fennell, and Town Hall. And so this ties back to our boil water notices. So what we were able to discuss with our regulators in order to decrease our frequency or decrease the opportunity of our frequency to go on a boil water notice is if we have constant chlorine residual monitoring at the PRV. PRV stands for pressure reducing valves. Those represent the 2 locations where we connect to the Calvet water system. There's one right here in the parking lot, and there's one out at the corner of Fennell and Yountville Crossroad. Those are our 2 primary connections. If we have constant chlorine monitoring there, and Calvet reports that they got a positive E. coli hit, we can immediately look at our chlorine residuals, and if the chlorine residuals represent the proper chlorine range in the water, then it indicates that that E. coli hit is likely a lab issue and not an E. coli positive in the water. And so if we're able to provide our chlorine data to the Regional Water Quality Control Board, the Division of Drinking Water, who tells us to issue the boil water notices, they can consider our data and make an informed decision on whether the E. coli hit is likely in the water or a lab problem. And so that the goal of that is to decrease the frequency and opportunity for our boil water notice.
Just want to add that because E. coli cannot live in concentrations of chlorine above a certain level.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So, and the rest of this is just our routine programs in order to own and operate and maintain the water system. In fiscal 25-26, here we are in that, here's where we have that, the green color versus the red color. And so the green color indicates a project that we would like to build that would be beneficial to the town. We don't necessarily need it to operate the water system, but it would be of great benefit to the town. This line item is specific to the design of a 1 million gallon water tank that would be located down at the pump station and primarily fed by the well. And 1 million gallons is roughly 3 days of water supply for our community in times of emergency. And when I say for our community, it does mean irrigation. So in times of emergency, if something terrible were to happen and we were completely disconnected from both Calvet and Napa water, and this water tank were in place, we would be able to supply our customers with domestic drinking water for plus or minus 3 days during that emergency. And 3 days is the goal for, that's generally Public Works uses for earthquake emergencies and things like that. And so that green line, this is where you see that green color coming into the process. And then the
only thing I think worth adding, as I understand it, when we studied that tank before, I think it was $4.5 million was the estimated cost.
Correct.
So this would be an updated analysis that would provide a new engineer's estimate, but the previous one was $4.5 million, just so you have a ballpark number.
And so we're going to hold off on comments on this if we have comments. We're just asking questions right now?
Yes.
Okay. So, okay, keep going. Oh, I do see a question from Vice Mayor Tripp.
I think it got answered by Brad, but in general, the price would be around $5 million, is our thinking?
Yes.
Okay. And that's a lot of engineering cost. It must be a very complicated process because none of this would actually build it, right? So
correct.
I mean, I'm not being critical. I'm just trying to make a statement that it must be expensive to engineer it.
Yes, there's 3 critical components to make it functional. Number 1 is the storage tank itself. The site is the pump station, and it's located in the floodplain, so we have to design the tank around floodplain regulations. It also needs, because it's on the downhill end of our water system, we don't have a mountain or a hill that we can build it on here in Yountville. It will need a pump station, and then it also needs a transmission main to pump the water back up to Washington Street. So giant water tank, pump station, and then new pipeline out to Washington Street to deliver the water to the system.
So this would give us 3 days of redundancy in the event that the well was out, starting with Rector. We would lose Rector, we would lose the well, and we would lose Napa water. Then, in theory, then we would have this as kind of our 4th redundancy. Would that be the idea? Okay.
Yes. We think the well is the least risk of those 3. If we had an earthquake emergency and Rector and City of Napa water was turned off or disconnected for some reason, the tank would be full. It's 3 days worth of water supply, and we can enact repairs to the well quickly if there are any needed that would continue to fill the well as the emergency continued.
And so as part of the design, you must be assuming it would be earthquake-proof. That
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
But all the rest of the system is earthquake-proof. So
Well, we
somebody
think- yes.
down on Mulberry like me would, in the event that Napa was down because of an earthquake, I would get water and my system would be working, notwithstanding.
Correct. Depending on the size and nature of the emergency. And we do have the phrase is escaping me right now, but we have the opportunity, like in the city of Napa earthquake, for example, our water crews mobilized and went and helped repair their localized system to ensure their customers remained online. So we would have that same response in this case, where if we had any localized failures, we would repair them with the goal of keeping our customers online.
Thanks, John.
Okay. So that was water. So that's the clear water part of it. Now we're moving into the wastewater side. So this wastewater, as a reminder, is also its own independent fund. In this case, I think it's important to remind people there's two pieces of the wastewater enterprise. There's wastewater collections and wastewater treatment. Well, there's actually three pieces. There's wastewater collections, wastewater treatment, and water reclamation. And so the distinction, or the way to think about it, is the sewer collection system that's in the streets that drains the sewage down to the pump station, and then the pump station pumps it up to the wastewater treatment plant. All three of those pieces are the collection system. And then once it arrives at the plant, it joins the effluent from the Calvet campus, and that's where the treatment part starts. And then after it's treated, when it leaves the treatment chain and goes into the effluent pond, the effluent pond is the reclaimed water that gets delivered to our reclaimed water customers.
Okay, so back to a summary of revenue, expenditures, and transfers for all of the wastewater funds. This is operating and capital combined, so you can see revenues versus expenditures, and then also the transfers out. So operating fund 62 is transferring into both of the capital projects funds, and we are, again, in this utility enterprise using fund balance to support the necessary level of projects. Next slide, please. Same information in a graph form. This looks a little wonky, and it's because of some projects that were planned, showing that spike in the budgeted amount for 23-24, spike in expenditures, but then the estimated column shows that those are not actually going to happen in the current fiscal year and have been transferred over to the next 2 fiscal years, which then moves that spike in expenditures to the budgeted, the proposed budget of 24-25 and 25-26. And those are based on 2 very large projects that were started in last year and have been kind of ongoing, and John will talk more about those in upcoming slides. Do you want me to take this one
Yes,
too?
please.
Okay, so a little bit more detail about the transfers. Fund 62, which is the operating fund, is going to transfer into the wastewater treatment capital projects fund 63. This is a fund that is also shared responsibility with the Veterans Home, so they will be paying 50% of the project costs, and we bill them for that at the end of the fiscal year to bill them for 50% of the expenses we actually incurred. And then 62 is also going to transfer into wastewater collection capital, which is, sorry, lost my train of thought there. I'm not sure what I was about to say. But as you can see, if the operating fund is able to transfer into the capital projects fund, which is good. That is opposite of the water fund. The water fund had such large amount of water purchase costs that for a few years it has not been able to transfer into capital, which it is now starting to do. So wastewater has been a bit healthier in the last couple of years is, I guess, the point that I'm trying to make. We're also paying debt service as necessary for the state water resources loan payment, which will be paid off in November of 2026. And we are paying the portion of debt service for the Madison Yacht Street project that comes from Fund 64. That one will be paid off fairly soon in June of 2027. Next slide, please.
So moving on to wastewater utility collections operations. So this is, again, essentially the sewer collection system and the pump station. This is standard budgeting and minor increases for 24, 25, and 25, 26. The increase is due to equipment maintenance that the maintenance of the equipment over time gets more expensive, and so there's a minor increase in the equipment maintenance budget just due to ongoing maintenance trends. Water treatment operations, so this is really focused on the water treatment plant. Similar, we budgeted, we have increases from 23, 24 to 24, 25, and 25, 26. The big piece of that is chemicals. So what we've experienced coming out of COVID is large annual increases in the cost of chemicals. And so we are part of a chemical pool where we optimize our pricing by joining other agencies, and it's an annual process where we combine with other agencies and we prepare a public bid, and the chemical companies bid, and we award as a group to the lowest bidder, and so that maximizes our opportunity for the least costly chemicals, but the cost of chemicals in general have gone up dramatically in the last 3 years. And then the other piece of this is another increase in equipment maintenance just due to the needs of operating a complicated wastewater treatment plant with lots of moving parts. So moving into wastewater treatment capital recovery.
Can we go, Councilmember Knight has a question.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Director Burns. Yeah, there's a couple questions I have. I'm sorry, I know we talked about this briefly yesterday at our meeting, but I think it's good just to review. In terms of wastewater treatment, how will the building and the opening of the skilled nursing facility at the Veterans Home affect our treatment processing? That's my first question. And then second, in the Treatment Operations Fund, it talks about the NPDES National Pollution Permit that is valid for the next 5 years includes new regulatory requirements for WWRF. I love these. How does that, I wonder if you could just briefly explain what type of new regulatory requirements you anticipate. So
the first piece of that is how the skilled nursing facility may or may not affect the flows at the treatment plant. So right now, the current understanding with Calvet is as the skilled nursing facility comes online, they're going to decommission the older building. I think it's called Holderman Hall. And so we're of the understanding we're trading like for like. And so as Holderman Hall gets decommissioned and the skilled nursing facility comes online, we're expecting the same volume of flows or maybe slightly lesser flows because of the modern fixtures in the new building are going to be more efficient than the fixtures in the older building. As in the future, as Calvet looks at redeveloping that building and or adding or changing their configuration on the campus, we would open discussion at that time as to whether there's going to be an increase in flows or not. So right now the skilled nursing facility is trading for the building that it's replacing in like kind, and we don't anticipate a difference in flows. Regarding the regulatory requirements, there's two pieces of that. Our permit to operate the plant is a 5-year timeline, and during that 5-year timeline, at certain intervals, they require us to take a large number of additional samples and operational data in order to inform the next 5-year permit process. So we are currently, our permit will expire at the end of 2025, and so we're in that space right now where we're required to collect a whole series of data that will help us work with the regional board to develop the terms of our new permit for the subsequent 5 years.
Thank you. I did note yesterday, it is amazing that on a regular basis, you take almost 800 samples a year. So that's
That's a lot of
a
samples.
lot of
yes.
sampling throughout the year. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
And just to add on to the skilled nursing facility, I think that they are planning on, I think it's 40 or 50 increased beds because there's such high demand for that skilled nursing facility. But on the flip side, there's a lot less demand for the domiciliary care. But I think I think you're absolutely right, even though with those increased beds there, regardless of what happens in the dom unit, I think the inflows they're so substantial up there because all the pipes are so low that, I wouldn't expect a net increase. Councilmember Reeves.
I just wanted to go over on this wastewater utility operating revenue by category page. I just need an explanation of, there are three things, low, medium, and high.
Oh, that's right.
I don't really understand what that means or what it's referring to.
So those are categories within our billing system of basically wastewater flow, I would say. And so low category, I'll probably have to take a moment to look up the categories, but low category would be something small like a church maybe, and a medium category would be something like a retail business perhaps, and then a high category would be a restaurant. So I can look up those categories to be more accurate in the definitions, but they're based on different percentages of water use to then calculate their sewer impact. I think it's called a strength factor.
Yes.
Yes. So it's used for billing purposes based on the function of the business. So it's commercial related.
Vice Mayor Tripp has a question for you, John.
So your sewer charge, maybe it's more of a John and Celia question. So your sewer charge is based in part on the water charge, right? Because it's all part of the same bill?
Not for residential. Residential is a flat
Okay.
sewer charge.
But in terms of Pam's question about how much wastewater you're using,
Right.
it's related as a
Yes.
function of how much water you're using.
Correct.
Correct.
Yes, it's
Okay, I
based
just
on
wanted to
a
make sure I
percentage.
understood how we charge. Okay,
Yes.
that makes sense. Thank you. Oops, sorry.
So moving on to wastewater treatment capital recovery, this is the capital portion of the wastewater treatment budget. You'll see a large jump from 23-24 to 24-25. We'll talk about that in a future slide and momentarily. So it's related to two specific capital projects that we're going to discuss soon. And wastewater collections capital improvement, it's the normal minor increases. What we focus for wastewater collection is the inflow and infiltration part of this. So this current fiscal year, we just completed a very robust inflow and infiltration study that identifies where in the entire collection system it needs the most repair. And so we're going to focus our capital projects on repairing those places first, with the goal of reducing the inflow and infiltration into the collection system, which then needs to be treated at the plant.
Can I just add a comment here,
Please.
John? So when I lost my thought a couple slides ago, what I was going to point out is that revenue-wise, this fund does not have a revenue stream. The wastewater system replacement fees are collected into the wastewater treatment capital fund. So this fund is solely dependent on transfers in from the wastewater operating fund.
This, similar to the water enterprise, we have a sewer connection impact fee. This is tied to private development, and so anybody that increases their use or adds a connection to the system pays an impact fee. The impact fees are unpredictable based on the lack of development and private development here in the town of Yountville, so we typically don't budget for them, and they've historically been less than $100,000, and they do get transferred into wastewater collections capital improvement fund 64.
Vice Mayor Tripp has a question.
On the impact fees, they're tied to building permits, correct?
Correct.
What if someone isn't building a new building but is just changing the use that's going to require a lot more? So maybe you're not building a new building, but you're going to get a new use permit and convert your store to a restaurant. Do we then, because I guess you have some building fees associated with that, or do we have any way of sort of having those folks contribute if they are using more wastewater?
Yes, if it's an increase in square footage and or an increase in use, the formula for the impact fee is paid at the building permit stage. So we do calculate definitely for an increase in square footage, okay, and also an increase in use, where if a retail store is going to a restaurant, right, there would be additional flows, and that's built into the impact fee formula.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Knight has a question.
Thank you, Director Ferns. Your report, good report. It always prompts questions. I guess I'm going back to Councilmember Reeves' question about revenues with low, medium, and high. And I also thought that relates to really kind of strength of the type of wastewater that's going into the system and how and the cost it takes for us to treat it. So earlier you talked about how we've had just a dramatic increase in chemicals. So do we look at when we charge out low, medium, or high treatment from different customers, adjusting those charges because of the higher cost of chemicals? Are we able to do that kind of calculation where we maybe adjust what we charge because it takes more chemicals for the higher strength treatment?
Not directly, no. So the chemicals, the strength of the wastewater, we purchase chemicals based on the quality of the water that we receive, based on the types of customers that we have. So the chemicals that we use to treat our general wastewater is consistent regardless of the strength. So the chemical costs are just the chemical costs because the market has increased so much. If we were to add a new customer that was introducing a new type of waste into the system, like if we added a winery customer and then we're adding their winery waste to our flow, we would need to buy additional chemicals or a new type of chemical to treat that, and then we would certainly work that into the equation.
Okay, so low, medium, and high is flow, but also strength. But the chemical, yes, there's not impact on the chemicals we purchase. Okay, all right, thank you.
I do have the definitions of the low, medium, high, if that would be helpful. So low is church, schools, group homes, town use, office, and barbershop. Medium is hotel, inns, and multiple commercial. And then the high strength is restaurants and tasting rooms. The low strength is 51% of the water usage. Medium and high strength are both 85% of the water usage, but then the high strength is at a higher rate, billing rate. So same percentage as medium, but a higher billing rate.
Vice Mayor Tripp.
One really quick question, John. Does all stormwater not go through the treatment plant, like when it gets collected up in storm drains and stuff? How does the town do that? Does that go through the treatment plant?
No, the stormwater is a completely separate system.
Okay.
And so it gets collected off the streets and gets routed to Beer Ditch and or Hopper Creek and carried out as stormwater to the Napa River.
Okay, so other than, say, infiltration of stormwater into the sewer pipes, which I think does happen, I know that for sure. I've personally seen it at my house. Generally, these heavy storms don't impact the treatment plant in the sense that the water coming off the roof and going into the street and into the storm drain goes out to Beard or out Hopper or whatever.
So this is a good question. It does affect it due to inflow and infiltration, which is a common challenge for any wastewater collection system and treatment facility. And so that's the goal of our inflow and infiltration study, is to identify those areas that we can get our biggest bang for the buck for improvement. So in answer to the question, yes, when in periods of a normal winter, the flows do increase at the plant because of inflow and infiltration. In periods of high winter, those flows also increase proportionately. However, if we can identify those places where the inflow and infiltration is happening and reduce those, it reduces the flow to the plant and keeps that water going to the creek and or the river.
Yeah,
And then outside of the, just the inflows that we get because of, leaky pipes and stuff like that, I really think that, and tell me if this is correct, that all the work that we do on our street sweeping, and we've actually increased it over time, that also really kind of helps us have cleaner stormwater because of that. So I think, isn't it true that the money we're spending there also affects this, the stormwater
Absolutely.
clarity?
Yes. So separate permit. We operate the storm drain system under an NPDES permit from the state or from the federal government through the state, and street sweeping is a big component of that. So it is money well spent for trash recovery and keeping the pollutants off of the street. So especially in those periods of first flush when it's the first rain of the season or the first rain in recent times, keeping the streets clean keeps the pollutants from entering the storm drain and the creek and the river.
And so we have less regulatory issues and oversight because of what we're doing compared to other municipalities.
Correct.
Yeah. I'm always trying to encourage them to look at that. So,
I know.
wait,
I'm sorry,
Vice
sorry.
Mayor Tripp has a question.
The infiltration is a real issue, especially in some of the older neighborhoods. After that giant storm, I had obvious rainwater come up through my shower. And so I know, and I thought I was going to have a real plumbing problem, but then I thought to myself, I bet you there's just a lot of water that made it into the sewer pipes and has now backed up into my shower. It could have nothing to do with my house. And as it turned out, it didn't, because after things dried out, everything worked. But my question being, other than just replacing the pipes, which are old, it's built in the 58 or so, how do you stop that infiltration, or where do you know? You just sort of start replacing sewer pipes? Or?
So we're just now receiving the results of the study that we did, and they've identified all of the areas. They did a really extensive study, and they've identified, for example, sections of old what's called vitrified clay pipe that has they're shorter sections of pipe, so they have a lot more joints, and those joints tend to leak. And so what we do, once we identify that section of pipe that can benefit from repair, is there's technology, it's called slip lining, they basically repair it in place. It's trenchless technology, and they can enter through a manhole, and they'll drag a new pipe through there and then expand it, and it takes the shape of the old pipe and seals off any of those leaks. And then they go back and cut holes and put a seal in at each lateral to ensure that those that were connected to that pipe remain connected to that pipe.
Has Yountville, so when I sold my house in the Berkeley, Oakland area, everybody has to have their laterals inspected, and pretty much you just go ahead and have the slip lining done, and it's, I don't know, it was $5,000 to $7,000, even though my house had been built after the fire. So it wasn't old. But has Yountville ever thought of doing a lateral requirement that people check their laterals when they go to, because so much of this goes on outside of the city's view. In other words, the lateral that's connecting to your house, and so they put a camera down there when you go to sell. It's just a requirement, and you either slip line it or you prove it has no leaks, although what they tell you is it's cheaper just to slip line it than to try to prove it has no leaks.
Yes.
Has Yountville ever thought of something like that?
We do have a routine. So similar to the water system, the town's responsibility ends at the clean out, the sewer clean out that is traditionally behind the curb or behind the sidewalk. And so the town is generally responsible for the clean out from, or the line from the clean out to our main, and then from that clean out to the house is the homeowner's responsibility. As building permits come through, we require the applicant to inspect both sections of those lines, and depending on the quality and or status of the clean out, the homeowner is required to repair some or all portion of it as part of their building permit. So we don't do it globally across all sewer customers, but we do definitely do it as people come in for building permits.
And the other way to do it, apart from a global thing, would be to do it at a building permit stage or the stage when people are selling the house, because
Yes.
it's kind of a easy way without burdening everybody in the town.
Yes. Okay, moving on to wastewater enterprise capital projects for 24-25. This is where what I'll say the big ticket projects exist for the wastewater enterprise. The first one being a green line in that we are seeking to hire a consultant to come in and do a water reclamation facility master plan for our wastewater treatment plant. And for those of you that know or don't know, versions of we combined efforts with Calvet in 1977 and took the footprint of Calvet's wastewater treatment plant. We have facilities on that site that predate 1977 that are still in operation. And so we, as a town or as a wastewater enterprise operator, need to take a pause periodically and do a master plan and look at the functionality of the plant as it stands today and compare it to modern technology and see where we can realize efficiencies both in treatment processes as well as things like energy. So right now we have added solar to the plant. We are operating the plant. It is kind of a traditional activated sludge digester plant with a filter to clean the water at the end. And that filter is an example of a prior effort to improve our water quality. So 10 or 15 years ago, we did a study, and that study revealed we should add something called a fuzzy filter to the process, which improves the quality of the water, which improves the quality of the water that we deliver to our recycled water customers. So this is the time that we need to really take a pause and have a consultant look at our plant and do a master plan and recommend improvements for efficiency and treatment and energy in order to look to the future and maintain that plant for the future of Yountville. So that's that first line item. The other two big ticket items are the facility office modernization project. That one's been on the books for several years, and it is finally coming to fruition in terms of the design, and we are seeking to get a USDA low-interest loan to fund that design. The application is in process. The USDA has been very positive after their multiple site visits and review of our draft application, and that we are likely to get that low-interest loan. And then that will increase it will essentially add a wing to the control building at the wastewater treatment plant. And for those who haven't been out there, we have 6 people operating in a space that was originally designed for 2. So this project will just modernize that facility and create the space for the number of operators that we have there, and also create proper facilities for a diverse workforce, meaning right now we have a single restroom and a single locker room, so it would create the opportunity for a diverse workforce to feel more comfortable out there. The third piece of this is the recycled water transmission main repair. That one is the failed line underneath the Napa River. It's expensive, and I like to remind people that in 1977, the regulatory environment wasn't what it is today. And so our forefathers were able to essentially wait until the river was dry. They dug a trench across the river, threw the pipe in, buried it, and to their credit, that pipe lasted almost 50 years, but we can't replace the pipe in that manner in this modern era with respect to the environment. So we are working through the design of that project, which will result in directional boring from outside the riparian corridor of the river, boring underneath and coming out the other side and reestablishing that connection. We did do a good job in our temporary connection, and it's still in place and it's still serving the customers. It's just not a permanent replacement for that line, which needs to be underneath the river. So we are able to deliver water to our recycled water customers in the interim while we are still working through that design. And it's important to note that we currently believe that the project will be reimbursed by our insurance. So that facility is covered by insurance. Conversations with the insurance company indicate that it's likely most or all of it will be reimbursed by the insurance. And then the rest of the projects on the list are normal routine maintenance projects and or programs necessary for the operation of the plant. So this fiscal 24-25 is a big ticket item, and then when you get in 25-26, we get back to the normal projects that we need to implement that we're aware of to operate the plant. And so here's just project insights. The picture on the left is where the wing that will where that door is off in the distance, and that window, the building will be expanded from there towards us in the picture, and will create office space for the operators that work there. And then on the right side, the picture really exhibits the challenge with the environment, in that's the Napa River. There's standing water in the Napa River. That red line that you see across the top is our temporary overcrossing, but we need to get underneath essentially that water outside of the riparian habitat in order to replace the project permanently. And then back to the storm drain conversation. This is independent of the wastewater enterprise, but it ties in. Thank you for the segue. We have drainage and flood control projects. It's funded partially by general fund and partially by Fund 75, which is the Measure A maintenance fund. The townwide drainage and erosion control program is a line item that we draw from any season where we identify or have a storm drain failure or an issue with a local drainage facility that we need to repair that season that is outside of a greater capital improvement program. Those are funded by that smaller numbers funded by General Fund 50, and then Fund 75 is the Measure A maintenance fund, and that's related to the maintenance of the weirs along Hopper Creek as well as the flood wall operation. When the flood wall was constructed, it came with an operation and maintenance manual, and so we do, in addition to the annual practice of installing the floodgates, we do inspections of the wall, and we'll have to perform any repairs and or things associated with inspection of the flood facilities, and Measure A funds that. And so that's kind of a pause for water, wastewater, and I'll hand it to Brad, who's leaning into
Yeah, I would, first of all, one thing to note about stormwater, we're in a very, I think, good place because of the work that's happened, through the decades in terms of, Hopper Creek and Beard Ditch and all the weirs, et cetera. A lot of communities are not, and stormwater is actually in certain areas now becoming a utility, and they're figuring out different ways to charge, homeowners and commercial enterprises. So thankfully, we're not there, but I do think there's that nexus because you get into, certain issues that are all related. But in this case, you do have Measure A, which is a nice feature, but it does expire. Is it in 26? I'm trying to recall the.
It expired in 2018, I believe. So this is
just fund balance.
This is a fund balance that we're using up. Yes.
Yeah. So the revenue's gone. At some point, the fund will be exhausted. We'll have to make sure we transition so we can maintain at least the current scheduled maintenance, so that we can continue to have the systems in place. So with that, I would recommend, Mayor, if you're okay, because I didn't on my final decision item slide talk about the two green items that were in water and wastewater. So if you're okay pausing, at least to get direction on how we want to address the the two items that we're looking for direction on, which were the master plan of the wastewater plant and then the water tank, or the design and engineering of the water tank. I think now would be a good time to hopefully get direction on those two, and then hopefully conclude any other discussion related to utilities.
Okay. So that good time for that. So I will definitely have a comment on the water tank design. That's the numbers are kind of small up there. That was $200,000 that we currently have. 250. See, I couldn't see the 5, so it looked like a 0. So right now we are planning to only construct the tank because it's $5 million, which would take a major hit to the water fund and the ratepayers. We're planning on only doing that if we get grant money, correct?
We are seeking grant money and/or a similar USDA low-interest loan for the construction of that.
Yeah, but even with a low-interest loan, it would be
Still paying.
paid back over a long number of years. So,
Correct.
I definitely favor the grant if we can, possibly get that. So, I'm not sure if you can give us any update on where that, what we kind of know, or what kind of positive information do we think that we would get that imminently, so that we could really justify this. Otherwise, I'm certainly in favor of pushing it off until we have more certainty that we really would have grant money. So,
Well, I think
what do
the
we know?
first positive information would be that this project was considered in the rate study that we just adopted. So the rates are contemplating this project, and so it lends itself to the design and construction of it. There's value, I believe, in designing the project now so we can have it on the books for when a grant and or loan comes available in order to construct it. And so I think that being proactive in designing it with funds available from the current rate study would be value to the town.
Okay, so if we did get a grant, so that's pretty much free money, so the ratepayers don't have to pay for that. I think, that's certainly what I'm looking for. But if we did get a low-interest loan, and I don't know what low interest is anymore in these days of higher rates, but would you imagine that would be, a 20-year loan? And do you have any estimates on what kind of impact that would cost just to pay for that tank? It's 3 days worth of water, so I'm also kind of factoring that in with my questions. But what kind of impact would that have to rates?
I don't have that answer.
Yeah, and I know it's kind of hard over 20 years. So, I think, overall, this is for 25, 26. So, since it's 250, I know it's already in the rates, but pushing it off for at least one more year, I think maybe we'll have a little more certainty about, because I think it will be a big discussion, and we will need some number crunching, whether it's a grant or a loan that the ratepayers would have to absorb. So, and I just wanted to make a comment on the wastewater, the reclamation.
Just real quick on that one,
Okay.
Mayor, just so we can, and I want to make sure we have
Okay.
consensus. But what I'm hearing is you support it if we have confidence that we're going to be able to get a grant, and we're not going
Right.
to, the loan, obviously, we can do the analysis on how that would affect ratepayers. So I do want to make sure that there's sort of consensus on that direction. What I would tell you, since it's being shown in the 25-26 in the second year of the budget, we could come back at the off cycle, before we start spending money, and give you an update on this. And then, John will probably be in a better place to talk about confidence level with grants. And then the other thing I would just point out to you, which I know you know, but Celia explained it earlier, you're currently using the money that was set aside from general fund money, I think with $650,000 over the next 2 years of like the roughly $1.6 million that was put aside to fund your capital projects in water. So you're basically subsidizing these types of projects through the general fund in order to maintain low water rates. So I know this community is sensitive, as all communities are, to utility rates. So I think that's the next question. I wasn't here during the rate study, so I don't really know exactly what was contemplated in the current rate study and how we're at least preparing for the next one. So I would suggest, based on what I heard, and if there's consensus, that we come back at the off cycle. We can do a lot more homework so we can inform you, and then you can make a decision if you want to put this in 25-26 at that point. For the time being, I think we can keep it there, but if you decide next year that you want to push it, then we would push it. Does that kind of
Well,
satisfy what you
we've
said?
got a lot of green, a lot of red lights here, but certainly that I would be fine with that. Getting some more information to really know if we could get a grant, and so it wouldn't have any effect on the ratepayers. I think this is money well spent and not that much. So I am fine with that. So let's go and see. Next up is Vice Mayor Tripp. Do you have a comment on this item?
I do. I'm going to put both my comments on the $250,000 for the water tank and also the master plan, the $400,000. Both of these are consulting and engineering, which I get is expensive. $400,000. So in total, that's $650,000 in consulting fees. And I think these are both really worthwhile projects. Forward-looking projects. In some ways, the water tank is third in line for redundancy, so it's forward-looking, probably a good idea. It's always a question, and I guess that's what we're here for, to decide how the town should spend its money. And similarly, on the master plan for I know it's an old treatment plant, but we are totally committed to fixing the building, which is pretty atrocious to have people working up there. So I'm far behind that. But in terms of redoing and rethinking the entire system, it might be a good thing going forward. But I also think just conceptually, sewer treatment has not changed maybe as dramatically as some of the other things that we confront. So it's, again, for me in the category of a good thing to do, but a rather expensive thing to do and not a super high priority. So again, it's a matter of how we want to spend our money. And I think that those consulting fees, while they might have been in the rate study, if you look at these projected lines of how the money predicted to come in is going to not cover all the expenses, even I think those lines reflect the rate study, it tells us we need to pay some attention that the revenues are not going to be sufficient to cover the expenses. So to me, that suggests we look at some of the expenses, which aren't to say that they're not really good forward-looking things to do, but to think about where we should be spending our money when overall it looks like it's going to be a little tight for wastewater and water treatment, even based on the rate study. And then I'm just going to make so I'm not in favor, I would be in favor of putting both these off at least for a year in terms of the study costs on both issues. Again, feeling they're likely smart, but we really need to look at what we can and should afford. And then also, it's not just the town. I know people just sort of shrug at this idea of a single person in a 1,250 square foot home paying $200 a month for water. But that's a lot of money. And it's a lot of money for many of our residents who are over 65 and maybe fortunate enough to own their own home, so they're paying it directly and they're not part of a larger group like the condos or something. So I really want to pay attention, and we all heard about the water rates, and I really appreciate that Council Member Reeves pushed us during the water rate study to take some general funds and put them into basically capital projects that then don't have to be charged to the ratepayers. But even still, it's not an inexpensive thing. So I just think it's time, and that's what we're all sort of paid for, to make those decisions about what we need to do for the future and what's cost effective and what's really necessary. So on both these, I would tend to defer them on those two items. So I spoke to the $400,000 for the master wastewater treatment plan engineering study and the $250,000 for the water tank. So those were my comments, and I would be happy with either eliminating but certainly deferring. So thank you.
Councilmember Reeves.
Thank you. I would really like to take the option that the town manager suggested, which is to do a little deeper dive in a study session about these two items. I think, yes, we need to be mindful about the rates, but on the other hand, especially the wastewater treatment plant needs to be kept up to date because there is new possibilities happening all the time. And if we can create better water, there's a lot of communities sort of dabbling in the idea of reusing water as potable water, and what does that look like, and how is that being accepted, and all of those kinds of things. Whether or not we would choose to do that is a whole nother thing, but we need to keep our plant up to date and workable in that respect. So I think of the two projects, I would much rather do the treatment study and where we can improve and utilize new technology in the wastewater treatment plant. I would put that as the number one idea. And the tank, because we already have a well, which we have spent a lot of money getting online as a backup, that the tank would be a secondary project and maybe pushed further out, depending on whether there were funds available as grant. I would much rather see it, as the mayor has said, as a grant rather than a loan, because that does impact our ratepayers way more. So I think that's where I would land on those things.
Councilmember Knight.
There we go. So, I'm maybe for a point of clarification when I'm asking Vice Mayor, are you talking about, when you say pushing, are you talking about pushing them out beyond the 25, 26, our 2-year fiscal, putting it or leaving it in the second year of our 2-year budget? Well, I just need a little clarification.
You know, I didn't really think about that, Eric. So I was responding to the town manager's idea that we could push them off, but I think that's a very good question.
Okay.
Further is better, generally, from my perspective, but yes.
Okay. Thank you. So it looks like, in trying to just looking at this, we have the water reclamation, that funding money in 24-25, and then the water tank in 25-26. So the advantage with now with the 2-year budget, we're not doing this every year. We could technically, we can leave basically that money for the water tank in 25-26. We come back next year, talk about it, and then like we will do in off-year budgets, we could make a decision about whether we push those funds out after maybe receiving more information from staff. And I think that's generally what I support, because I think at some point we need to spend the time to talk about a water tank, because Councilmember McKee Can and I, we had the opportunity to take the tour of the reservoir and the treatment plant, and they have the Vets Home, Calvet has a water tank up there. Was that a 1 million gallon tank that
Yes.
they have on the property? So they have a tank up there, but in a worst case scenario, we're talking about failure of Rector Reservoir would likely mean a failure of that water tank there. So at some point, we're talking about guaranteeing or thinking about a three-day, at least a 3-day water supply for not only folks here on the east side of 29, but everyone that lives at the Veterans Home too would probably have to need some access to stored water. So maybe when we're talking about this and we're talking about a grant, we're really talking about we're talking about this whole community that would need water, which may help move the grant possibilities along. So I think it's a good place to leave that, leave the dollars as recommended by staff now in both the fiscal years, and then have time next year, and in the next year as staff researches water tank storage, that the council could have a further discussion for that second year. It does draw me. I'm tempted. I'm tempted now to. We're going to eventually. Maybe we'll come back to this in a little bit when we talk about our general fund reserve funds. Is I'm curious now when I look at a water drought reserve fund that's in a enterprise fund that has $2 million sitting in there, and it was a wise investment. It was money set aside from the town when they sold our North Bay Aqueduct in Kernwater. That's $2 million sitting there, and I'm just kind of curious, maybe down the road, a conversation of, does that money need to stay in an enterprise fund, or is our dollars there that sure might be a good use if we're talking about creating water storage in the future. So maybe I don't want to start that conversation now, but it'd be interesting to add how the Water Drought Reserve Fund plays into all our new reserve fund policy, and whether it really has to stay in the enterprise fund or not, or what other uses we could potentially invest that money in. So, thank you.
Councilmember McKee Can't.
So I also see value in the water treatment facility and modernizing it. I'm wondering, with the water customers that we've had through the years, is there any way to offset? We charge them any more through the years, or are we still on contracts that have gone back decades?
Most of our current recycled water customers date, I believe, only date back to 2015.
Okay,
so they're not that
old.
Right.
But as we're improving the quality of our recycled water, it might be something to look at, see who else is out there that could value it. And I know we approached this at one of the council sessions. Are we using that water to water our own parks and such too? I know that would make a lot more expenses and costs for piping and such, but just wonder what the market is out there for cleaner recycled water. And with the water tank storage, there's definitely value in having that security, but I would tend to defer that right now. I mean, at $1.6 million a day, basically for 3 days of security, we do have a lot of lot to think about whether or not, at a time when we need to be more fiscally conservative, if it is value of that security and what we can put on our books right now. So I would tend to defer that one.
So I didn't get to weigh in on the wastewater, but I'm going to go back to the water tank design, and I agree with town manager. Let's see what we know at our mid-year cycle, and I think we when we do that, can we also get look at, because we have a 5-year plan as well, and really kind of show, because I don't want people to get kind of confused. Even though 1 year shows a deficit, the way the rates are set up, it does make up later. So I think we need to look at that whole picture, so there isn't the confusion about, oh, we might be in a deficit when the rates, when we set the rates, we tend to set them so they're flattened out. If you front load them, then the rates really go up in 1 year, but it's just easier on the customer to kind of flatten it out, and that takes into account our 5-year plan. So I think really having a little more explanation of that is probably going to help everybody look at the big picture there. And we'll see where we come up with the water tank later. But again, we do have the $2 million, and that was set aside when we sold off our rights to the city of Napa. And boy, that was a long time ago. And back then it was $300,000. So really, over the years, we've definitely made up in lack of charges what we've been able to kind of put aside. But again, that's part of this redundancy plan as well. It's right now designed to be if we really need it, you go out in the spot market and buy this water. So I think that's still a very prudent thing to kind of have there. But we'll see how that all factors in when and if we hopefully get those grants. So, and the reclamation plan for the treatment plant, I always love infrastructure. People hear me say that all the time. And I remember, really having to sit on this council and really digest the whole fuzzy filter, and we had to replace the fuzzy filter. But that has really made a lot of efficiencies over time. So I think that I'm fine for, so that's something I'm a little more flexible. Is that already baked into the rate plans as well? Or is that Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think I'm a little more flexible on that charge right now. It would be a higher priority for me, but I can certainly wait for mid-year on that as well.
Okay. Why don't I offer?
I wanted to make one more comment, Madam Mayor.
Yeah, I was just going
Okay,
to call
but
you.
before the town manager, is that okay?
Of course.
Town
Yeah,
manager?
Vice Mayor Tripp.
I did want to clarify some of the thoughts on the expenditures, and I'm only looking at, and it's not paged, but it's a graph that was handed out for the budget workshop that shows water utility revenues and expenditures, all funds. So I know it's water. Is that sewage as well?
No.
Different chart.
Okay, I didn't find the same graph for sewage, although I thought I did. But on the water, it's pretty clear. We have two lines here, and oddly enough, usually you would put the red line as expenditures, but in this case, the red line are revenues, and the blue line is expenditures. So, in answer to the mayor's thought that there's no physical constraints on this, I'm only looking at the lines, and the lines, as you can see, the expenditures, except in the first 2 years or so, the expenditures are quite a bit more than the revenues. So, in terms of the storage tank, I think it is appropriate to think about. And when you look at the annual expenditures of $1.5 million, $1.8 million, $250,000 study is not a small amount. I don't know what the wastewater lines look like. I thought I saw them somewhere here.
Yeah, that is in there. It's the one that had the interesting M shape based on those two projects that were budgeted, and then in the estimated, they're not budgeted, and they're shifted to the 24-25.
But it would be good, I guess, to look at a wastewater. There we go. Can you show me again? The red is the revenues?
Correct.
Okay, a lot of times, well, it doesn't really matter. So the red is the revenues, and you can see, except for the very first year, our expenditures are not insignificantly more, and then as important, by the time you reach the end of the cycle, the delta has changed a little. But I'm just making the point that it is time to look at the money if we're thinking long-term, which is sort of what we're paid to do here up at the top. So anyway, that's I just want to make that point, that there is a physical issue that we need to be paying attention to. And so that's where, again, looking at the wastewater, and my glasses are not that good, but $400,000 is not a small, and I do agree, particularly about reusing water is a really important issue, but the $400,000 study, that's a lot bigger than reusing water. And so one thing we might want to consider is reusing water or other concerns. But my personal thought about it's kind of an ignorant thought, because I don't really know if treating sewage has improved a lot. My sense is we sort of do it the way it's always been done, but maybe it has improved. But I'm looking more at it as a financial thing, not any statement on the importance of engineering studies. But I did want to clarify, after what the mayor said, that based at least on the charts, we do need to pay attention to the money.
If I could just add to this chart here, a big component to this chart is that emergency recycled water line project, since that was not planned and not part of the RAISE study. And since we are hoping to get insurance to cover some of that expense, but we're not quite sure how much that will be at this point, that is helping to create some of this gap. So hopefully insurance will be able to help cover some of this project.
From an accounting perspective, I know sometimes when you have a receivable or a recoverable, you factor that in, right? I don't even know what the accounting standard is to how certain it has to be that you're going to recover it or it becomes a receivable. But are we showing any of that expense as recoverable or receivable at this point?
We did receive $250,000 in this current fiscal year, so that is reflected, and we are having current conversations with the insurance company. At the time that we were generating this, I don't think that we had a number that we were confident plugging in here as
Okay.
revenue, but we are showing what we have actually received.
Okay,
to
thank,
date.
yeah, I know you're always on top of it. And so do you think that the expenditure line will come down? What in the best case, how much more would we get back, do you think? Just in general terms, $1 million to $1.5 million? I don't even know what the
John
whole
might
cost
have a
is.
Better estimate.
Right now, they're saying that they're believe they'll be able to reimburse for the full amount, which is estimated to be $1.8 million
Okay, so that would be a big
of
change.
a $3 million insurance policy. So it's not it's
1.8,
1.8 to repair it. The insurance policy is $3 million, so we wouldn't even be exceeding the policy.
right, assuming that they decide it's all, okay, thank you. So that would make a big difference in the line. Thank you for pointing that out.
And just one more overall comment. I've heard so many positive comments from residents about, thanking us as a council for all the work, and it really goes to staff. So I want to pass that on for all the drainage and the flood control work that we've done. Everybody has really noticed, with the recent rains in last year, that how well everything is functioning. So just want to pass that on for. Glad you guys did that. It's working well. So, and yes, Councilmember McKee can't.
Thank you. Since we are waiting to find out what the insurance will pay, it makes sense to me that we also wait on making these investments with the outside services. I know at home when I'm feeling conservative, even though I might want to make some window improvements or things, I wait until I can forecast my income better. So I feel like by pushing this out a little bit, it gives us that luxury of knowing what we have coming in for sure on the books.
Okay. Town manager,
Okay.
comments. Did you understand what we said?
Well, I want to try to summarize it and then at least provide a course of action, and hopefully I get nods and we can move on. But if we need to vote, because I think I heard a few different things. But in essence, the course of action I would propose is that we maintain the budget as proposed. However, that we come back to you because I was conferring. With John, the $400,000 for the wastewater treatment plant study, we have not begun a procurement process. So that would likely be, to me, probably a 3 to 6 month process in order to put something out, to get consultants to put in proposals. And so once we have that information, the $400,000 came from Napa Sand, who had done a similar analysis of their wastewater reclamation facility. So before we authorize, because ultimately, and I know you all know this, but you would have to authorize that contract, right? So just because the money is budgeted doesn't mean we have the right to spend it. We have the right to bring back, within my authority, certain things, but ultimately a contract of this size and scope would have to be approved by council. So if we go through and start a procurement process, I would propose that whenever we're ready to come back, we could both talk to you about specifically what a consultant is offering as it relates to the wastewater reclamation facility, and also at least come back with an update of where we feel like we're at with the water tank. So if we did a study session sort of on utilities where we addressed both of those, but we had better data, at least on the wastewater treatment. Because I, like a lot of you, am kind of curious of what technology or what efficiencies might be in place. Because we might come back to you, truthfully, with sort of an entrepreneurial opportunity, whether it's better water, or at least recycled water for more customers. So maybe there's a different rate structure that could be proposed if we made an investment. I also do know, as we're exploring energy resilience, there's a lot of work going on at wastewater treatment plants to create energy, whether that's fuel for vehicles or actual electricity. So all of those things are being discussed. I know American Canyon, because John went down and visited, is doing an extremely deep dive because they have a big facility. So we're also kind of learning from them. But before we spend it, I guess what I would propose is keep the budget as proposed, but come back before we spend any of the money. And at that point, if you're feeling like, hey, we should do this, then I don't know if it's 400, and maybe it's less at that point. But I do think the water tank, obviously is not until 25, 26 under this. I do think that becomes kind of a bigger policy discussion in terms of, just rates and resiliency and the like. So for me, I feel like I need to learn a lot more on that subject to advise you. And I think it would, I'm guessing, be November, December timeframe where we could come back to you all before we spend any money, but at least having kind of the plan. And then finally, what I heard from you, Mayor, and I think is the right thing as we look at charts, because I show you that 10-year or the 7-year forecast 10-year chart. You do need to look at utilities, I think, through a 5-year lens. It's hard when all of a sudden you're looking at a 2-year snapshot, because I do think, one, the rates, the lines will come together and they'll sort of flatten. I think the reason this one is so spiky is because of what Celia alluded to. But I think at the time we come back to you for the study session, I would definitely want to be working with staff to show you a longer-term look. And then you need to look at rate studies, in terms of how those fit into the graph. And at what point, are you going back to the ratepayers? Because that's ultimately where the rubber meets the road. And I think all of this is planning to get to a place where, yes, utility rates are out of control. I think we're all talking about the same thing. It's more on the PG&E side, but as we control water and wastewater, we do, and I've looked at the analysis of how we compare to our benchmark cities, and, we're in the middle, just so you know. I mean, there's clearly, Calistoga, I think, is at the top, and St. Helena, and we're sort of right there with Napa. So we're in a good place relative, but I do know that this is a hard subject because, relatively speaking, everyone's hurting. So,
and just quickly to add to that, every year the unknown of what water is really going to cost us from Rector. So for the 5-year study, we plug in a percent, 7 or 8. I'm just kind of guessing is what we've done in the past, but sometimes you never know.
Yeah. Well, and the thing we can add to at least the study session would be, where are we at with Calvet and Rector? Because I think we all talked about the JPA for the testing and the sampling to be a springboard to have the bigger conversation. And I think there's a willingness, as you know, that's a sort of a long conversation and it's somewhat sensitive. But I think with current leadership, I think we're in a good position. So that would be another thing we could chat about. So, I feel like I'm getting nods again. If you want to push back the $400,000 into the second year, is sort of what I was hearing from some people. We can do that too, if that gives you more comfort that we're not going to spend the money in the current fiscal year. But I would tell you we don't intend to until we have, what would be a procurement process where consultants would have to bid for the work. And, in either way, we'll come back to you, and then we'll have to make a budgeting decision. So it's your discretion if you want to push that into the second year. I think we can work with either. It's just I want to be clear so I can tell Celia where to put the numbers.
And Vice Mayor Tripp has another comment.
I'm a proponent of pushing the $400,000 study into the second year. And I say that for 2 reasons. I know you won't spend it without further approval, but, we all have a lot of information coming at us, and the inclination is when something's in the budget and we've already spent a lot of time with it, as a council, we don't pay as much attention to it, which is understandable. And then also the contract itself comes ready-made, fully done on a Wednesday. So for us then to look at the contract is the point at which we really consider, is this $400,000 well spent? After it's been negotiated and after all the RFPs have been looked at and variations, and that's appropriate. You're the town manager, and John is, the one to do that. It doesn't offer as much of an opportunity to really look at it again. So I do appreciate the fact that you all are very considerate in terms of not springing that stuff up, but just as a council member, there's not much chance to have realistic input in the scenario where we look at the contract once it's fully completed and been vetted and whatnot. So I would be for pushing it into the second year, long story short. That would be my vote.
Okay, we're ready to wrap this up. I think we're going to call for
Everyone's
a
kind of
break.
nodding on that, then or not nodding on that. Okay, so why don't we get
Oh, Eric wants to say
why
something.
don't we get either a vote or some form of consensus?
Okay, Councilmember Knight has his light
Thank you.
on.
I guess I'm fine with. I think it's wise. It's good decision making for us to spend some more time and talk about and potentially move the reclamation facility master plan to 25-26. But I'm just quickly before I agree to that. Are there any funds, grants, or any monies that we'd be losing out or losing out in this process if we move the planning process back a year?
No.
Okay. So I would support then if council wanting to spend some more time reviewing this to support it, moving that line item to 25-26.
Mayor?
Yes.
I thought I had my light on. Oh, never mind.
Okay.
Well, anyway, I would really support leaving the wastewater study in the current budget and having the discussion maybe before you send the RFPs out. I don't know if that's even an idea that works or if you need the information from those proposals in order to talk about the issue.
I think it's much better to have the information from the RFP so you can look at that. If you get into approving the RFP, it gets to be, to me, just, I don't know, tedious in too many steps. These are generally pretty, what's the right word? Just pretty standard.
Standard is the word that comes to mind. But
Yeah, and I think it's sometimes hard, especially in Napa. I've learned, the consultant base is not what it is like when you're in a metropolis. So you never really know exactly what you're going to get. And so I think it is better for us, if you do. And again, this will take 6 months. So to go through an RFP and then to, we wouldn't be negotiating contracts. We would kind of be just sorting through the criteria and trying to establish, what makes sense, and then come to you. This wouldn't be with the contract. This would be in a study session saying, okay, we've received 3 responses. Because in some cases, at least in my experience, you kind of want to vet the different ideas, because someone may come in with it's a $50 million plan, but it's waste to energy, anaerobic digesters, it's like everything, and you may really like that because it pays for itself in some way, or there's a grant or other things. And so that's where it's, to me, hard to predict. So I'd rather have, at least kind of what the market is for both the consultants and what others are doing, because there is a lot going on in this,
Right.
in this world right now. And I think, this is where MCE and others are starting to get involved with these types of projects. So I would advise you, to me, the year, whether it's year 1 or year 2, is not a big deal. I think you can kind of, decide on that. We would go through because this would be staff time, which you've obviously already budgeted for, to do the RFP and to do the work. So we would need a budget for that. But if we execute the contract, I think what we're estimating is something similar to what Napa Sand did. So that's where the $400K comes into.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that because there is a little bit of a climate emergency component to this kind of work and these kinds of ideas, I would rather see the discussion happen sooner than later, and that's why I'm more in favor of leaving this in the next budget versus pushing it off 2 years, because I think we tend to push off things and say we have time when in reality there's not that much time. And I feel like if we're going to be responsible to everyone about rates, about availability, but we also have to be about sustainability and whether or not we can influence how the climate reacts to our actions. I think it's incumbent on us to actually do this study and and try to take that into account. So that's my comment.
And I concur with that, too. I definitely want some information because I think town manager made a good point. I mean, this technology in this area is really probably rapidly moving. I'm really hoping because I read a lot of stuff about it. And so I'd rather leave it in for now. We can always have time once we get, some broad, concepts from the RFP to make a decision.
I'm stewing between the two of you.
Oh, okay. You want to hear from Councilmember Knight while you're stewing?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. So in thinking back, I mean, when we're talking about water reclamation facilities master plans, I've read and seen in the past that other even communities in the North Bay have done projects where they implement, they add solar and things like that. So as part of when we're talking about, as Councilmember Reeves have said, we're talking about planning water reclamation. Are we talking about sustainability, energy, potential solar or other uses that we could add to the facility update?
Yes, that would be built into the RFP. We would ask for a review of the energy component of the footprint of the plant as well. We do have solar out there already, but it's solar that's been there for several years, and it might not be as efficient as it could be. There's also other opportunities with methane capture and reuse and things like that that would benefit from the study that could then lend itself to the climate portion of the plant's footprint.
Okay. I definitely see a benefit for that. So if we're not looking at necessarily, I can see that, and I agree with Councilmember Reeves and the mayor that it's important for us to do the studies to have an idea. So I think I'm going to go back to my initial thought that I think we benefit, the community benefits by leaving this in 24-25 and find out what sustainable practices and programs we can add to this facility master plan. So I'm going to go back to that recommendation, support the current staff recommendation.
Thanks for the extra time.
Then we'll go to Vice Mayor Tripp.
I was just going to ask and or suggest that if we do reach a vote and a motion come on the floor, that perhaps it might be prudent to separate these two issues, the storage tank study and the water treatment study.
It makes sense why we are talking about the water treatment study, that we do take advantage of technologies. I just wonder how much more will be discovered if we push it out a year. But I do agree with Councilmember Reeves in thinking that we need to harness what we can now. And I do also want to, it gives me some comfort in knowing that it would take a good 6 months to even get the RFPs out. Because I want to look at other municipalities. We can see what other people are doing, but we're so small. We have to go to scale, obviously, too. So I will support that. I will support within this 24-25 to finish that sentence.
Yeah. And just to clarify, it would take 6 months, I have you, to do the RFP and to get the proposals, not just to get it out. So we should be able to get it back and then be at a point where we can come back and talk about what those results are. Because that may be a point in time, again, where we may want your help in vetting the proposals because they may be, very different. And so it's not like as you're all saying, the technology is emerging, therefore sort of the proposals could be, really different. So, Mayor, do you want to facilitate a vote? I'm definitely feeling like we're getting consensus, but in order to formalize that, I do think a vote is the best way to get the clear direction. And I think however you want to orchestrate that, I'm happy to help.
Okay, so we will first take a vote on the water tank design. I don't know if we, so basically we're going to vote on...
I would say someone should make a motion on which fiscal year that should be budgeted in. So what we have proposed is that the water tank design be budgeted for fiscal year 25-26.
Because at that time, we're going to get more information about,
And we will
grants
come
and
back
stuff.
before, yeah. And
So I will, would somebody like to make that motion?
I was just going to say that I would like to make the motion that we leave the water tank purchase exploration in the 25-26 budget, but with the stipulation that we have the discussion mid-year or in between to decide whether that actually belongs in the 25-26. Maybe it belongs further out, but I would make that motion that we keep it as it is proposed by staff in the 25-26 budget.
Okay, so I'll second that. So can we get a roll call vote on that?
Councilmember Reeves?
Aye.
Councilmember McKee Can't?
Yes.
Councilmember Knight?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Tripp?
No.
Mayor Mueller?
Yes. And then the second motion we were going to make is on the reclamation plan for the treatment plant. Would somebody like to make that motion?
I'll do that one too. I move that we keep the water reclamation study in the 24-25 budget, and with also the stipulation that that workshop or discussion comes back to us mid-year.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Reeves?
Yes?
Councilmember McKee Can't?
Yes, with the
Council-
stipulations.
With the stipulations. Councilmember Knight?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Tripp?
No.
Mayor Mueller?
Yes. Is that clear? And if everything's clear, I am going to give everybody a 10-minute break, so we'll be back here at 12:20.
Thank you.
That'll be your new
That's
job.
nice.
Right there.
Thank you.
All right, we are turning on my button. We're back in session after our break. So,
Okay, now we're going to switch to the non-utility CIP, and quickly, John and I developed these initial slides. I'll just go through them quickly, but I think you know the CIP is capital expenditures. It gets into this analysis that we really never stops, but I think being presented today as a culmination of at least the last year I've been here, and I'm sure prior to that, a lot of work that goes into, looking at priorities, but then matching funding sources, and that's always kind of the trick. And I think, the Fund 50, which we'll talk about, is your general capital, but there's a lot of other funding sources that go into it. And there's a lot of funding sources, in some cases, that are transferred into Fund 50. So you have to understand those, and you're really just, we used to call it the color of money, where, color's got to match, and you got to make sure that you're, at the same time dealing with priorities. And I already went through, and we are talking about Funds 81 and 82. We talked about the green and the red. You'll see that more in these next slides. But that is something that will get refined through the year, and will be a little simpler when we get into internal service funds and such. So this is a collaboration. It's managed by John and his team. Rosalba's here, who is in every meeting, and others are involved. We have a CIP committee that we've established that meets at least monthly, and I'm sure with John and his team, they're talking about this daily and weekly. But you see all the departments, and really all the departments here are involved. The process is now a 2-year process because of a 2-year budget, and we look at a 6-year horizon because we're looking at those budget cycles. So the first year is the most important. In this case, the second year is quote-unquote funded from a budget perspective, but like we just talked about, we can have milestones within a plan that we have to come back to council. And truthfully, we never want to surprise you with contracts. So we want, when a big contract comes your way, we want you to have already to at least vetted it from a policy level, and in some cases gotten into the details. And these are all the funds that contribute into the CIP. So we typically, I think in the past you've seen this presentation in fund order, but since we did utilities, we kind of skipped into the 60 series, which you just gave us direction on. So we're going to go back to, and we're going to start with streets, and then we're going to work through Fund 50. And Fund 50 really, and we also talked about Fund 75, which was the flood maintenance. So 50 really integrates, when you see these charts, which I'm just going to go to the next one. This is going to be the order that you're going to see. So we've already done water, wastewater, drainage. Then we're going to do streets, community facilities, townwide programs, and then finally park and rec. But when you see this chart, I think you know this, but when you look at the far left and you look at the first number, you're looking at 50, 82, 25, 20. That's the fund we're talking about, okay? So in certain cases, and I'll just explain the mobility plan, and I'll turn it over to John for the other two. The mobility plan is $50,000, and even though that's an operating expense, we put it in the CIP because that was one of the 3 5-dot goals that you gave us. It was a ped and bike master plan. I'm using the word mobility because that's just the word that people use these days, because it's a little more than peds and bikes. We can talk about parking and, golf carts and other things that move people around. So mobility is becoming a much more of a industrial or an industry term, I should say. But that 50,000 is similar to kind of what we talked about before. That was just a plug number. We're going to likely, do an RFP and see what consultants are offering, et cetera. So that's kind of the overview of the CIP. Streets and transportation have unique, in some cases, restrictions or constraints, and I'll let John kind of talk through funding sources, and then at least the projects in green, and you can touch on any of the red projects you want to as well.
So, jumping to the red projects first, we have 3 sources of funds for street transportation maintenance, and the big one that you always hear us talk about is Measure T. And so the Measure T is our largest fund, and it's the one that paves our streets. In order to maximize the asphalt that gets put on the street, we use our other funding sources for the design and inspection of the Measure T project. So the SB1, the Fund 26, we use specifically for curb, gutter, and sidewalk repair and replacement related to a pavement project, and that allows us to get that work done in advance and not affect the schedule of the paving project. And then more importantly, the gas tax fund comes in dollar amounts that wouldn't pave very many streets or even pave a street. So we apply that to the design and inspection of the Measure T project. So by doing it that way, we maximize the amount of asphalt that we're able to lay on the street using Measure T, which gets us that higher PCI that we take pride in. The next two, so that kind of covers the red projects that people are interested in terms of the annual paving and maintenance projects. Getting into, do you want to skip ahead a couple slides?
Before you do that, I have a really quick question about the Measure T. So there's also that little bit of TDA3 funds that we get. Is that all lumped into Measure T if we apply for those?
TDA3 funds are typically grant funds that we apply for separately.
Okay. So what fund number? Do they have their own special fund number?
We don't currently have. The only TDA3 funds we have are for a specific project.
Okay, got it.
That would be in Fund 50.
They would be in Fund 50?
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
Thank you.
Do you want to go to
Okay.
pictures?
Yeah.
So one of the green lines on that is what we're now calling the South Washington Street parking lot. And you see two options here on the screen, or two versions, I shouldn't say options. Times have been moving quickly since as this project evolves. Recently, we presented to Parks and Recreation Committee the idea of building a parking lot with a dog run on that footprint, that pie-shaped footprint down south of Veterans Park. Since then, we have acquired the property next door, which creates opportunities for a different scenario. And so,
Which you will see a layout for, just so you know. So a later slide, I'll see
Yes.
the dog park here.
so right now, our goal is to make better use of that dirt lot. With the opportunity that exists next door, we've kind of shifted gears and are looking towards, we're using the phrase currently as a service parking lot, but the idea would be to pave it in a fashion that gives a location for the commercial vehicles that bring people to Yountville, the buses and the limos and those types of vehicles, to give them an opportunity or a place to park so they're not crowding out or hanging out in our neighborhoods. But in doing that, we would also be creating regular vehicular parking for the regular cars. So the version that is on the screen now, the top version is a draft version of a service parking lot that would allow bus and limo parking and give them a comfortable place to hang out. The idea being, if we give them a comfortable place to hang out, they're more inclined to use it. If it's shady and a comfortable parking spot, they're going to go there instead of trying to find a shady spot in the local streets. The version below is the dog run version of the parking lot that we had presented at PRAC. So all of this is kind of evolving. We do have in the budget, we are proposing $200,000 of general fund money to do the work, and then $100,000 of Fund 29 to augment that budget. Fund 29 being the
Upper Valley Waste Disposal franchise fees.
yes.
Yeah, because the other piece of the service, which is a requirement under our, I think our franchise agreement or state law, is to have a mulching operation or a point of
Distribution, yes.
So that would be integrated as well into the service parking lot. So we thought was appropriate use of the Fund 29 for those. And it's a good place for trash trucks to turn around. And in talking to John, because that's a dirt area, and obviously you see buses and other things already parked there, it does affect our PCI in the sense that that transition from dirt to asphalt does, erode the road, right? So by having it all paved and having it set up, so whether it's buses or trash trucks or what have you can turn around and use it, it will improve or at least maintain our PCI at the same time. So
We're not going to get that one extra point I'm looking for to get to A.
That's our Measure T project this year might get us there.
Solano, okay.
Yes. Next slide. So the other green item in the 24-25 budget refers to the undergrounding project. There's $200,000. Of that $200,000, there was a transfer into Fund 50 from the impact fee fund of $112,000. And the undergrounding is a very complicated subject, and I think the quick way to describe it would be PG&E has a rule, what they call Rule 20. Rule 20 is the rules associated with undergrounding overhead lines. Rule 20A is specific to PG&E, the utility, using the town's Rule 20A credits to underground a project. Rule 20B is a combination of PG&E using the credits that the town has accrued, plus a local funding effort by the form of an assessment district where the properties affected by the undergrounding would contribute money in combination with the PG&E Rule 20A money to underground the project. And then Rule 20C is strictly, we have a lot of money and we want to go underground this stretch of underground and we're going to pay for it. So where the town sits right now is in 2019, backing up one step, PG&E is in the process of revising their Rule 20A program, and Rule 20A is essentially going away. As part of that going away process, they're redistributing unused funds to other communities that might use them. In order for our funds to not be redistributed elsewhere, in 2019, the town adopted an undergrounding district to establish a potential use for our Rule 20A funds. So that undergrounding district was formed in 2019, and it's that picture on the left where it's essentially the cemetery, the properties that front along Yountville Community Park, and the streets that surround Yountville Community Park. And so that's our current underground district, but we need to bear in mind that we have $193,000 worth of Rule 20A credits from PG&E, which doesn't get us much undergrounding at all, if any. At current rates, that gets us about 130 linear feet of undergrounding, which doesn't even span from one power pole to another. And so we're trying to find a way to use those Rule 20A money, trying to find a way to underground some lines, and also trying to find a way to use our impact fee money. So the $200,000 in the current budget, we would use the portion that came from the impact fees to essentially do a study to try to determine how to best optimize our undergrounding opportunities. And so in the meantime, this district stays in place and keeps our Rule 20A funds, minor that they are, in place until we can figure out how best to apply those funds and any local funds and or local assessment district funds that might turn into a meaningful project.
Okay. That makes sense? We're going to come back to that at the end, and I think what we're proposing, at least in the budget, I should go back. Two things I want to point out before we move into facilities is one, of the 200, I think, the number on the impact fees is 112. And so we're going to, what I will tell you is, we don't intend to spend general fund money on any study as it relates to undergrounding. But because we have the 20A funds, we have the impact fees, we're trying to put those to good use. And I think what we intend to do is come back at some point, this may be another study session, to talk about, okay, here's the process, here's kind of the future of undergrounding. I would not advise you to use general fund money to subsidize that, but I do think if there are opportunities for, whether it's developers coming in or whether it's neighborhoods or streets, to talk about self-assessments in order to finance those things if they choose to. Those would be the options that we would likely present to you at that point. But I will tell you, even though you're seeing 200, we've been talking about this gets into what got transferred into Fund 50. And so, we'll do that math, but I will tell you right now, we don't intend to put any general fund money towards that, okay? Then the other thing, which is in this slide, which we don't have an image, and I do mention this at the end, we're talking about ADA improvements related to our transition plan. So at the end, and actually at the beginning, I foreshadowed it, what we're proposing, because we're still waiting to get the updated transition plan based on the parks that you all talked about last budget cycle. So I think as we update our transition plan, we really need to come back to you with priority projects. So, at this point, you can direct me at the end or direct us at the end that, we would push that into year 3 and we would come back with a more of a, prioritization process as it relates to ADA, which you are required to do, and it is somewhere else. I'll show you where else it is in your CIP budget here in a moment. So wanted you to know that. Coming back to this, community facilities. This is community center enhancements is the consolidation of 2 projects that were in your current CIP or your past CIP, and that was the shade structure over at the town square, and then the enclosure, whatever I think we called it, barbecue enclosure storage or something to that effect. So we've reworked those, and I have some images here for you. But that what was $195,000, which we didn't spend any of that money on, is now being proposed as $250, and you'll see in a sec what you get for that. But then the next 3 projects, or it's really one project, but the next 3 rows. One is, the common split, which is the school site. I think everyone knows that $500,000 of general fund money and then $200,000 of Measure S money. We currently have $500,000 in this fiscal year we're in. We're proposing $700,000, and then you'll see in the next fiscal year $300,000 here in a second. So that's the $1.5 million that we talked about above the purchase price. And it's broken between general fund and Measure S, with the understanding that the Measure S money will be funding most of the master planning process, where we're going to be talking about housing, workforce housing. And then the town hall landscaping and access, that's what's left over from, I don't know what the formal title was, but I call it the front yard, but it's the front of town hall. So we had spent $15,000 in the current fiscal year out of the $75,000 budget. What we're proposing is to keep the $60,000 to make improvements in conjunction with the school site improvements in terms of the landscape improvements. So beyond that, and we can come back and talk about all these things, but the basketball hoops, I know Sam is looking at options and getting refined pricing on that. You can see the stuff in red is, like we've talked about, more of scheduled maintenance. And then in the second year, you'll see then the $300,000, which would push into 25-26. At this point, I know you all know this. We've owned it for 2 weeks. These are all just, educated guesses, projections. But this is where my goal is to get through the interim phase in the next fiscal year. We'll talk to you about what we think we can accomplish with what we're proposing in the budget. And then this gets more into the planning phase, which is why you see $200,000 for Measure S in both fiscal years. We will hopefully get through the interim stuff so that we're really now working on the long-term master plan of the site at that point. Okay? And here's the image for the community center enhancements. You can see on the left, the current barbecue area that we've been spending more time at lately. And you can see a sketch of what's being proposed, which would, in essence, utilize the openings as more of roll-down doors with kind of you can see kind of bar seating. If you look to the left, you can see an ADA bar seating. So it just takes it a much more usable space. And in order to, store food and to utilize that space more, you need to secure it such that, critters aren't getting in there and that kind of stuff. So that's the reason that, but it would be basically making better use of what's existing. And then for the town square, you can see this cantilevered umbrella, and if you look at the orange lines, if you can kind of orient yourself, the town square versus the building, this would provide definitely high quality umbrellas that would last for 20 years is what I think we're being told. I'm looking at Sam, but that are warranted, high quality umbrellas. They would cantilever sort of out of the planters over both edges of the town square, and then there would be new furniture as well. The stuff that we put in last summer after Sam and I worked together has worked really well and has been used, but you can see it's already on its last legs. We've already lost, I don't know how many umbrellas, a couple umbrellas, and I can see damage to the furniture. So the idea is really just to do what we've done in a much higher quality and much more durable. So that is what we're moving forward on, assuming we get the approval for the 250. And then you've seen these images. This is moving to Yountville Commons. We've talked about these 3 phases: initial, interim, and idea envisioning. And then this was shown at the open house where we just used the quadrants, the 4 quadrants of the site to orientate people and tried to really make a point that the quadrant 1, which is the existing buildings, the school buildings, can be used for interim uses. There's been talk of other civic uses, so that would be where we would concentrate that. And then the back corner, quadrant 2, would be where we would focus housing. There has been discussion, should the housing be there? Should the housing be on 3? This can all be part of the idea visioning discussion. But it is important for people to understand that we have to build housing. And so we're using Measure S, so it's not a question. It's just a where and how and all of those things. There's also a need to maintain a park and open space, so we're showing that as quadrant 3, or the ball field space. And then quadrant 4 is town hall. So we organize things into these 4 columns, which are, what we kind of did the goal setting with, which is things that have gotten done, things we are currently doing, things that are on our to-do list and sense that they're funded, and then future. So you can see in column 1, a lot got done, which led to the close of escrow, all the inspections and the due diligence. And now we're in the process of doing a lot of the, sort of the fundamental things that need to get done to use the buildings and use the site. So continuing the cleanup efforts and making sure all the systems are functioning and that things are safe, and that we're going to resurface the parking lots and paint the buildings and clean up the trees, make sure the irrigation's working, all of those things. So this is all happening within the $500,000 that has already been approved. As we get into phase 2B, as I call it, which is the to-do stuff, the 5 things that I really want to focus on, and I think things that can get done within the budget that we're proposing, is what we're calling the Commons Hall, which is the multi-use building, the Wellness Center, which is the library with the 6 classrooms, the front yard / garden. So this is the idea of town hall front yard, but also extending that along the school site and bringing the garden, or the community garden, back to life over there in the corner. Doing something with the snack shack at the baseball field that serves the community, and then the park and open space. And you can see for the interim, we're using the north for the dog park and maintaining the south for baseball. And then the future gets into the stuff that I already just talked about, and I will outline public outreach and participation. I think it's important, and I know I've mentioned this to you all individually, but for the community to realize that the ZDRB, the Measure S Committee, and the Park and Rec, those groups have a function, and they should be a part of the outreach participation, and they should serve in the advisory role to the council. That's what you appointed them for. So we want to make sure that they're put to work through this process. And right now, this is a very sort of loose outreach strategy or outreach process. We've already had the open house, so we're underway, and that was a good start. But This is where we need to put a schedule together and talk about study sessions and other open houses and public meetings and all the stuff you see here. I've been working with Hillary Gady, and our goal will be to get something out in June so that there will be a specific schedule. And so everyone will kind of know the opportunities there will be to chime in. And I already mentioned with the goal of coming back to council, March, April of next year, where you can then decide based on hopefully a really robust, we always use that word, robust process, where you can, hear from the community and make sure, all of the issues that are out there, and there's a lot, I'm sure you, like me, are hearing a lot of things, and it's great. Like, let's keep listening and let's not make any really hard decisions until next year. But in the interim, let's bring life to the space. So this was this slide I patched together to try to talk about the interim uses, and you can see a gym up there, and you can see this is actually really a cool image of the Commons Hall, I'll call it, cut in half. We hired this company that does laser scanning. I don't know how they do this. I'm assuming this is drones and fancy machines, or they wave wands around. But this not only gives you the topography of the site, which is critical in terms of being able to do engineering, but it also gives you renderings of the buildings that can be used for design purposes. And you can cut right through a building here. So this is a cross section, and you can see the stage. So the designers are going to be using this in order to make sure that all the things fit and we meet all the requirements. So that's just kind of a cool image of that building. And then to the left of that, you can see the initial, it's hard to read it, but these are some of the initial ideas for the front yard. And then to the right, you can see the snack shack that we're looking at. And we're working with the group that's currently running the farm stand in the town square, and trying to figure out if we can do a more permanent use. And I think at the next meeting, we'll have something before you for the Wellness Center, so you'll be able to see kind of what that really is. But I think if we can accomplish all of those things, those 5 things, within the next year, these are all things that, although they could be part of the long-range plan, we are making sure that as we think about new ideas, that if people fall in love with these things, that they don't necessarily need to go away. But this is kind of the art of the master plan, and we're trying very hard, and I think working with a good team to again bring the facility to life, because I think it is it can serve a lot of good things, but I also want to be cautious of not doing too much. And this building that's right here, which we kind of call the South Classroom building, like, we're not proposing anything in that building. This is the oldest building of the 3. It probably is the most expensive to get functional, and at this point, the budget that you're seeing, we can potentially use it for certain things, but we're not proposing any investment in that building, just the other 2, in order to achieve these interim uses that I'm putting before you. Here is the layout for the interim dog park. So this is, I feel like there should be a drum roll. So generally what you see here is the north baseball field, backstop, and dugouts. You can kind of see the old field underneath there, but this is the field that's not in use. So the idea is to create 2 areas. One, I'm just going to say for active and passive, okay, because we get into small dogs and big dogs and all these kind of versions of best policies. And I think generally what you're looking for is a dog run where dogs can exercise and run around, and then the other area is more passive, it's more of a social area. And the nice thing about doing it in the way we've proposed is, one, we're looking at temporary fencing. We're looking at some specs, so we can move things around if things don't work or we feel like we need more space. But I also think that the dugouts serve as nice areas for dog owners to sit and it's a shaded area, and the only slight improvements that you see here are, how we have the access gates, because you can see kind of 3 points of access into the park, but also there's actually a water line right there at the top, so the blue lines we would provide water spigots so you can, have water for the dogs. I think we're prepared to get this going as soon as we have an approved budget. Truthfully, I think we could probably do it within the existing budget we have, especially if we rent. But I want to make sure that you're seeing this, and I know that I talked to Sam about this going back to PRAC next week, so that they'll take a look at it, and then it'll come back to you probably on the 21st with hopefully a policy that talks about the rules. And that's where you get into passive and active and responsible dog ownership and all these things that are important. So I think this is a big step forward, and John mentioned before, I think it eliminates, at least in our view, the need for other dog parks throughout the community, because this is a central location people can come to. So this is, the last thing I'll say on this is that if it works, long term, as we look at housing, this is an easy design to then replicate on the existing baseball field. And I have experience with multi-purpose fields where if these are temporary fences, there is a way to reconfigure the fence lines for things like baseball or other sports, what have you. So, so I think this is a good step in the right direction. I know there's been a lot of discussion on this subject, and we'll continue it. But the nice thing about interim is if it doesn't work, we can hopefully fix it. I'm just going to keep going. I think those were the big ones, but the Vineyard Park Enhancement Project and the Energy Resilience Plan. The Energy Resilience Plan is simply like kind of following up on the microgrid priority, and I don't know that we're going to have to spend any money. I do think we've in the process of applying for grants and looking for partners, but we just wanted to put something in there for purposes of following up on the council goals. And then the Vineyard Park Enhancement Project, I'll let John talk about this.
So this is the ongoing effort to improve Vineyard Park. We actually had a larger budget amount assigned to Vineyard Park as a potential match for a grant that we didn't receive to improve around the backside of the tennis courts and the unused area of Vineyard Park. So since we didn't receive that grant, we're using a portion of that money to make known needed improvements to Vineyard Park on a much smaller scale. And so on the left, you see we created the viewing area for the pickleball courts, and that creates, and a gate, so that creates a better environment and a place for the pickleballers to wait and watch while they're waiting for their turn. The other part of this is the exercise area. The surface of the exercise area is kind of nearing the end of its life. It's starting to unravel. It is a surface that we probably wouldn't replace in like kind. So right now we have a proposal from a company to replace it with if you're standing on this spot at Vineyard Park, right behind you is that rubberized surface. So we're proposing to replace that bound gravel surface with the rubberized surface, similar to what's immediately adjacent. And so we would finish up these minor improvements to Vineyard Park with this money that's available, and then Vineyard Park is good to go for indefinitely.
And then finally, on the Park and Rec side, we have an awning to cool or make the Veterans Park bathroom more usable because it gets hot, and so we need to, shade the door in the drinking fountain for it not to burn people. So that's a small, and then the Forester Park Play Service, and then we don't have imagery, but the idea of a southern loop or is where the Hopper Creek Trail ends on the south. It sort of terminates in a weird way into an apartment project, and so we wanted to look at how we could go through the edge of the church and improve that area. This is something that's just a guess. You see it's in 25, 26, so we would need to do some planning, and this might even be something that the mobility study would help inform. So those are all of those. Celia is going to quickly just give you an updated thing, and then we'll take public comment and get to the decision items. And I think I've listed most of the projects there. So if we can quickly get there, and then I can answer questions and take
We
your
can
comments.
quickly get there, but Councilmember Reeves has a question.
Okay.
I just have a question. I see some of these things have been on the CIP for a while, and but I don't see the community park shade structure on this. Is it that we are going to do it within this year's budget?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yes. All right.
Okay, so this is the updated proposed general fund biennial budget snapshot. So we did, at the beginning of the presentation, let you know about some things that were increased, some expenditures that were increased, and some transfers that were adjusted a little bit. And so this is the product of that. You can see that we still have a balanced budget in both fiscal years. Next slide. Here's the transfers. You can see that there's a little bit of a decrease in the transfers to capital projects. That was the only transfer that was affected due to the adjustment of some of the other expenditures, like the addition of, the increase to elections and insurance premiums. Next slide. Fund balance allocations, and really the only thing to point out here is due to the increased expenditures, the projected unassigned fund balance has gone down slightly, but still projecting to have a little bit at the end of both of those two proposed fiscal years. Next slide.
Yeah, I think this is the overall slide back to the overall budget. We're trying to kind of lead into now the final discussion, which will lead to the adoption hearing on the 21st. And then we're going to talk about this at 3 o'clock today, but this, goes back to having the assurances that we can, work through emergencies or any sort of shocks to the system. And then, this slide is the last slide, which is the one I talked about earlier in terms of making sure that people are thinking long term while we're budgeting over the next 2 years. So that we can take public comment. And there's 2 final slides.
Okay. Vice Mayor Tripp has a question before we go to our public.
Listening as carefully. I might have not have been listening as carefully as I should. Did you point to a place in your information that showed what you were predicting as excess fund or unallocated fund balance?
For which fund? For general fund?
In general, yes.
Yes.
Or was that on here?
It's this slide. It's the bottom 2 numbers
Yes.
in the right.
Yes.
Okay.
So 352 in the next year, and then 374 thousands, of course, in the following year.
So even with this budget, we would predict a 1.8.
Now, $350,000 surplus.
The very bottom line is the unassigned fund balance, right above the total.
2324 is the, okay, and then, I got you, thank you, I'm sorry.
And that is in your budget materials, in your budget binder. There's a
thanks.
page for that.
Yeah. And just so you can look ahead, this is going to be our discussion slide.
Okay, let's go to, we have a member of the public who's shaking his head no. So thank you very much for.
The last one, but you ended up in the right spot.
Okay, well, sounds like, thank you for that public comment. Appreciate that. Okay.
Yeah, so, I tried to create a list here of decision items and some final direction. So under the projects we just discussed, you can see the Commons is broken in between the interim and then the IDEA stuff. The South parking lot talks about the dog run versus the service vehicle staging and mulching. The Vineyard Park enhancements are what John explained in terms of the surface. And then the utility undergrounding plan, I think I explained in terms of no general fund money, but we do feel like we need to put our money to use. And then longer term, the ADA transition plan and improvements. If you agree with that, then we can budget accordingly. We will be doing the mobility plan and energy resilience plans if you approve the budget. 60th anniversary arrangements, there's been some discussion since our last meeting, and we put 20,000, but that might be worthy of discussion. Business economic development is another topic, and then finally our staffing levels and allocations. So happy to take your questions and comments in any order, but this slide was intended to try to organize that.
Okay, so I've got some. Let me check them off as I kind of go, and then I'll kind of turn it. I'll just do a couple quickly. 60th anniversary arrangements. This is our 60th anniversary of the incorporation of the town of Yountville. So we had a great birthday bash 10 years ago, and so 10 years have now gone by. So, and I know Councilmember Knight kind of brought this up. So I would like to, and we have a little bit of money in here to have some fun with. So I would like to maybe suggest a couple of ad hocs for everybody's consideration. I know Eric has expressed an interest in history, and I also have a passion there. So maybe an ad hoc that really kind of looks at that, and then maybe another ad hoc with myself, and I know Councilmember McKee Kent's very interested, and maybe we can, working with Sam and Whitney, kind of put together some planning activities or kind of fun events. So that's like one, and for everyone to kind of talk about.
Mayor?
Yes?
Maybe just as an aside on that issue, that since the veterans were so important in incorporating, that we make sure that our plans include making sure that they're also with that party.
Okay, absolutely. And I did have a comment regarding, I think, as we all kind of know, staffing is biggest cost of our budget every year, and so I'm very supportive of the additional staff that's been requested in their proposed budget. But I'd like to suggest that at our next budget cycle review, that it include an organizational analysis of our current positions and what their duties are. And I know Brad's already talked to us and begun this process, but a detailed analysis that's going to really kind of help guide the mid-year budget adjustments and any future budgets, especially in light of our new budget demands, especially that we're kind of seeing in this proposed budget. I think this analysis would also really help the council identify opportunities for improvement and effectiveness. And the ADA transition plans, I'm willing to kind of hold off on that. I know we're waiting on some additional ADA plans for our different projects in our different parks, and then we'll have to, put that together with our current ADA plan. And so I'm willing to wait on that a little bit while we really kind of look at what we've done, what we need to do, and really map that out. Much like our water tank and our plan for looking at the treatment plants a little more.
Yeah, Mayor, and I forgot to mention, I went over the slide too quickly, but under your townwide programs, is that what we call it, John? Townwide programs and community projects. There is 120,000, I think, is roughly what we've invested almost every year on ADA improvements. So
okay,
you have specific projects, and then you have kind of general improvements that we do budget for.
Okay.
And so that was in the red. I jumped over it, but just so you know, there is a fund. And so usually that's engineering, working through a transition plan and doing, for me, it was always sidewalks and like aprons and, making sure that the sidewalks are accessible.
And that can be when we get the new project in
we
the
can talk
park,
about
so
that
with the old one and all that, and putting it all together so we can get a big macroscopic view of that. So I'm just going to stop with addressing those. Councilmember Reeves is next, and I'll probably kind of come back and address some more in a minute. Councilmember Reeves.
Okay, I'm just going to go down from the top. I think all of those general fund projects that are listed here seem like they're in the right place in the budget, and I am in favor of doing them. The utility undergrounding plan seems to me that that's the one that could be pushed out the farthest, and also making sure that we're looking at the best kind of surface that gives us the least amount of trouble for the Vineyard Park enhancement would be really important to make sure about.
Least amount of, you mean maintenance trouble?
Yeah.
When you say trouble, yeah.
Yeah.
And I should have been more clear, but south parking lot, we are looking for direction on the dog run scheme versus the service vehicle
Yeah, I think
theme.
you did answer that issue. I think absolutely a central location is better. Will sort of make sure that people aren't getting in their car with their dog and driving to the south part to run their dog. So anyway, I think, yes, I would much rather see the dog run in a central location on the ex-school property. And I think the whole idea of a staging area, I know that my house is impacted by random limousine drivers and bus drivers who are looking for a shady spot to park in. I think also to help facilitate the chamber's job in promoting Yountville, that the service parking area is a great idea. But I would say that, cement or asphalt is not the most user-friendly in this environment now. And I have seen in other municipalities, Berkeley in particular, where they've used rubber hold sheets with gravel underneath for drainage, and the rubber is filled in with gravel and nailed down somehow. I don't know exactly, just on my own observation. I didn't quite get the engineering part, but to provide groundwater runoff, and also the way they had installed it, it was butting up against a street. So I'm sure they had their paving issues addressed by this particular substance. And I just feel like we can't afford to just lay cement willy-nilly anymore, because it is one of the most greenhouse gas producing items. So I think I would really like to look at other options for whatever material we put on that surface, though I think it's a good idea to have a vehicle parking area. And then I also think as we get the ADA transition plan updates, then we could discuss that more in the interim. And I agree with the mobility plan, because that's something that we should be working on all the time for our residents' ease of movement. And for business economic development, I really think that the council needs to have some sort of workshop or discussion specific to find out what we mean by economic development and how we want to proceed with that in our, and how we may be able to facilitate things and what kind of budget we could create for that. So I would like to see that come back to us, not with any specific money attached to it in a budget, but as a discussion item. And then I agree completely with the mayor about this, the staffing allocations in the budgets, and that we would like to see how we can rearrange or make sure we're using our employees in the best way we can. And also, in light of the fact that most residents are thinking that we're already overstaffed, I think we need to make sure that we know exactly why we're employing everyone and how their job makes the residents' life easier. So I agree with all of those aspects of the budgeting.
Vice Mayor Tripp.
I'm just going to go through the top of the list, and many of you will be happy to hear I am not going to speak on the issue of dog parks. The town manager has heard more than enough, as all of you have. On the public outreach idea phase, I just wanted to say, I know it's really hard to come up with all the dates and a precise plan, but even a general statement of what the plan would be helpful. I mean, even if people don't know exactly when the meetings are going to be or who will be conducting them, I get a huge, every neighbor I see or person when I walk my dog has an opinion. When are we going to participate? So even if we're in the stage of just saying more or less what it's going to look like without precise dates, because I know a lot of work goes into that. So I would just ask that. On the dog run down by the staging, I think a commercial vehicle staging area and or parking for just people at the park makes a lot of sense. I think this whole idling thing, I was on Highway 80 and I saw a couple trucks that had these green stickers that said certified idler, which I took to mean that they have less emissions while they're idling, would be a way of also stopping so much idling if we get all the buses in one place. So I think that's a good idea. I did want to speak a little bit more on the undergrounding plan. We're fortunate in that John Ferns has actually done quite a bit of undergrounding and knows the costs involved. Rough numbers, I understand we have about $300,000 in money that is likely to disappear, and that money, some comes from PG&E and some from impact funds. So I don't really see a lot of harm in spending the money that we have on a study. But there is another thought. It also does consume management time to be involved in looking at RFPs, doing the study. And it's a little bit like, yes, I would really, really like to build a second story on my house. Would I pay $10,000 to an architect knowing there's no way I'm going to come up with that amount of money and it's just not feasible for me? I wouldn't do that. And I really think, given the cost of undergrounding and the fact that the neighborhoods would have to pay for it, and I think there's only a couple neighborhoods, apart from the district, we have that district up there, but where actual taxpayers would have to pay for it, would be one of them is my neighborhood. And there's just not a lot of appetite. I really can't see people voluntarily doing a district. And I know you can finance it and put it on your tax bill, but many of us who don't really benefit from Prop 13 and are already paying well over $10,000 a year in property taxes may not have a lot of appetite for that. So I guess that would be my question. Are we designing something that really is not feasible for Yountville, given the size of the town and the appetite for the several neighborhoods that would be involved? But that's just kind of an aside, so I say that in case other people have the same reaction. On the ADA plan improvements, I think we do need to keep planning, particularly because we have new facilities. So to me, that makes all the sense in the world that we ask that. I think where we left off after much hard work by John and Rosalba was that we would revise and relook at our ADA plan in light of the actual facilities we have in Yountville, which is sort of what the law requires. So it's time to keep doing that. The only comment I had on the anniversary arrangements were similar to what Pam said, and I think the mayor's idea of ad hoc is good. Whether we'd have to have two ad hoc committees, that could get kind of overly complicated. I have no particular desire to be on it, although I'll love to go to the festivities, but two committees seems like a lot. In terms of the business and economic development, I think that's a hard one. So I would actually like a workshop so we could get a little more granular before we embark on what do we think we could actually put in Yountville. And we have some obvious limitations, so it would be helpful to actually know what other people are thinking. So I would like a workshop. And then on the staffing levels and allocations, I know Brad has done a lot of work on, and I've been in a similar situation where I came into a department with a long-term loved leader, but also it's hard to kind of figure out who does what and where, and my sense is Brad has done a really good job of that. But if we decide to go ahead and do that, I think one thing I would really like to include in that, because many members of the public do think we have a lot of people here at Town Hall, and I used to think that, but the longer I'm here and I've seen the complexity of the regulations that are coming down, things like this wild housing element, I have come to see why we do need people. The size of our town isn't really a reflection of some of the complexity of the things we have to deal with. But that said, I guess I would really want to include, because it's not just the number of people you add in terms of salary, it's also all the benefits costs. And I can't really offer an opinion except to say that I think we have very good benefits, and some of those are definitely related to headcount. So like OPEB is a program for providing health care to people who've retired. That's a program that costs based on headcount. A lot of our programs, so if we were going to do any sort of study in depth on staffing level and allocations, I think we really need, and it's designed to take a measure of our costs, we really need to get a sense of, in addition to the cost of adding a $100,000 salary, many businesses are in the 25% benefit range, so it's really 125. If you're at 70, you're really, or 80, you're at, doubling the salary. So I think we need to, if the point of doing all this is to find out what kind of staffing we need and what the impact on our costs going forward is and how those people should be allocated, I do think it would be prudent to include costs, because I think it's kind of the same kind of consultants, and take a look at our benefits programs to make sure, and I'm not talking about doing away with pensions, but we have a lot of good time off programs and other costs, and just make sure that we're understanding the full cost of these programs. So that would be my only thought, if we're going to do a real cost of staffing review, that we include not just the cost of adding an additional person and what we might need them for, but then what are the ancillary costs that go along with that.
Councilmember Knight.
Thank you. So just looking at this list here, looking at just general fund projects, I'm supportive of all the recommendations for the general fund projects, and I didn't participate in the dog run discussion with South Parking Lot, but I agree with Councilmember Reeves that a central location for a dog run, dog park, is a lot better than down in the south end of town beside the highway. So, and I also agree that, maybe this is an opportunity for us for the South Parking Lot to look at other kind of permeable surfaces that we could use there. There's, even with asphalt, there's more coarser permeable surfaces that help improve water flow for trees and things like that. Maybe this is an opportunity for us to try a surface there that we might eventually use more in other places in town. In terms of the utility undergrounding plan, I know we have, just my only thought to that is I know we have some general plan that to finish undergrounding at the North Park Community Park, and maybe RH has some involvement with that. Now, I didn't realize we had an underground district by the park, but maybe we invest our 20A funds for undergrounding in the short term around parks and things like that. And if we're doing, RH is doing some of it by the park, maybe we look at the community park or Veterans Park or wherever we have an opportunity to remove, like a power line that runs across Lincoln to the bathroom there at Community Park, and just try to underground those areas. So, In terms of our ADA transition, I know the town has always been very active in doing ADA transition work and planning, and so I'm sure we'll also talk soon in the future about Washington Park. So I think we're very active and aggressive when we're looking at ADA. I also support any of our mobility plan and energy resiliency efforts. I think it's good for us to plan for the 60th anniversary, and I'm happy to be involved in any type of a ad hoc that talks about the historic Yountville and Veterans Home. Just generally, I enjoy that. In terms of business economic development, I think it's good for the council to plan to talk about and discuss just general economic development, because for Yountville, we all talk about it, but then the question is, what can we do in our small town? But I think just always talking about community and economic development and having that a planning meeting discussion would be very beneficial for the council and the community. And in terms of just staffing levels and allocations, I think I just want to remind the community that the type of staffing levels we see maybe in just this year's budget are bringing back the Parks and Rec department back to pre-COVID levels, and with all the activities and community involvement there, I think it's good that we're back to staffing and at the Parks and Rec department, and I think what I've heard in terms of just the short-term efforts for staffing changes in the future, or just good planning that the town manager and the staff are doing as retirements occur. And so I think you're doing a very good job with that, but I also support the mayor's suggestion that maybe in the next off-year budget cycle that there's a report and just a general conversation about staffing levels, allocation in the future. I think that's just good planning practice. So other than that, I think I'm done. Thank you.
Councilmember McKee Camp.
So on general fund projects, I am excited about the commons and all of the aspects that we feel like we can get off the ground in this first year. The outreach will be good because I too get a lot of questions, and I also respect Vice Mayor Tripp's idea of just putting a general high-level framework out so people can calm down a little and realize we're not starting the housing building right away, because there's a lot of fear out there. So if we can get ahead of that, that would be good. The dog people that I know were not interested in the dog run at the south parking lot. They felt like they were being thrown a bone. So I'm sorry, had to do it. But definitely service vehicle staging. I think it would be a better looking, even though people don't come in on that torn up Napa County Road to the south of our town. That still is kind of the first thing people can see, and it's time for a refresh. I am all about not having hot cement there. I think drivers would appreciate that too, and that's an important area for sandbags for that side of the town, so as well as mulching. So I think that would be a very respectable thing to do for that side of town, for the concerts too. Then even bocce, we run out of parking when the park is full of people taking advantage of it. Vineyard Park enhancements, gosh, it kills me to see $150,000 for a rubberized surface, but I know that's the cost of doing business in government level. We're lucky that park is so gorgeous naturally. So if we need to have a surface there that is going to be long lasting, then I guess we have to do that. And I trust the Public Works team to find the best one. Utility plan, that is the one that I would push out a little further. I know that's been a popular dot for the mayor for a long time, for undergrounding.
No, not this one. I'll comment on that.
Okay. But again, with trying to tighten our belt and balance the budget at the same time. That seems like one to push out to 26, 27. ADA plan, wait until better mapped out, again, after the new buildings. And also, I think after the mobility plan is in place, we'll have a better idea of other areas that maybe can be elevated to the top of that list or bumped down. The 60th anniversary, it's something we can look forward to, and whether ad hocs for actually activities and what people are doing in addition to studying and learning about the history, will help any way I can. Regarding the business economic development, probably that's one that I have been the loudest on, because I feel like we've got to get our engines turning to bring in more revenue. And I know there's a lot of naysayers that say, we've looked at that, we've done that, it won't work. But I had also brought up the idea with town manager of looking at this through a lens with our the TID, with the Tourism Improvement District. Perhaps, I mean, the hoteliers are the ones that also are looking at what there is to do here. We have to keep attracting people here. Even it's just the resorts on the weekends, we've got to give people shopping and things to do. And we've got some space. I know we're not going to activate this particular, the classroom side of the commons, but we need some office space. We need people to be able to conduct business here. So whether it's a workshop with us or we take it to the TID level to get them talking about it, it definitely needs to be looked at further, and also incentivizing the businesses that we do have to start operating at a higher level with the partners at the north end as well as here at the estates. Staffing levels, last but not least, as Councilmember Knight pointed out, Parks and Rec and Public Works have been operating on slimmed down staffing levels and keeping town and our recreation operations going. So it is time to make sure that they have the staffing that they need to support what we, the community, ask and have come to expect. So looking, down the line through more of a magnifying lens at the costs and the long-term benefits is one way I feel like we can be as fiscally responsible as possible.
And just to kind of go back over what I didn't address, I think for the Yountville Commons, I think the initial phase that we have, I think it's aggressive, but I think it's doable. So let's see if we can get all that done by somewhere near our 60th anniversary or the beginning of next fiscal year. I think the public will be able to see the direction we're going. And also the public idea for the public outreach. I think it's always more productive if, we can, provide some, general what we think is going to work, what's really doable, what we kind of hear from all of our kind of community, and give them a bit of a roadmap of things to kind of pick from. So if we could orchestrate that, I think it'll be a more productive conversation. South parking lot, yes. Yes, the Nixie and the dog run. Vineyard Park enhancements, I think I'm fine with kind of moving forward with what I call the bleachers. I'm still kind of don't really understand enough about those surfaces. I kind of remember that we've gone through, I don't know, in the last 10 or 12 years, 2 of them. Something wasn't right about the first one, and then we replaced another one that now needs replacement. So something that's really going to go out for a long period of time. I mean, I don't know if that even exists, but from what I've kind of seen. So I would kind of push that out until we really know it really needs to be done, and there's some kind of surface that's really going to give us some longevity. And this utility underground plan is kind of totally different. I think I put undergrounding on our last strategic plan, but it didn't rise to the top. But this utility undergrounding plan is different, and I do appreciate trying to utilize some of those PG&E funds, but I don't know. I just don't think this is kind of quite ready for prime time to kind of put much money in. So I think we might want to, maybe when we kind of come back with the final budget, I'd really like I hate to leave money on the table, but I hate to spend it and then it go nowhere either. So I'm kind of, I guess the best summary I can say is it's kind of push this out. I think I already commented on the ADA plan. So I kind of see the ADA and the whole mobility as, a big concept. And so I'm kind of waiting to see what our ADA is and what, that might already kind of influence what some of the mobility is. So I kind of see that's kind of both of those, I kind of have a line that connects them a little bit. So I think I wouldn't rush one over the other, but I think we do need the whole ADA, as I mentioned. So, and I think that business economic development. I think it means lots of different things to lots of different people. So, really, kind of talking about. I mean, I think the whole vehicle staging area, that is really economic development in a sense too, because now we're really providing for some of the people that come to town for the day or for whatever reason to get transportation, so they all don't have to jump in their cars. And I've always felt that all the infrastructure that we do is so critical to the businesses, because believe me, if you've got crummy roads and you don't really have good water running and sewer running, businesses are going to be yelling and screaming. And so I think really having a whole, really just education and a lot of input into what that really means and what's really doable and is definitely worthy of a great discussion. So you've heard from all of us. You got some questions. You want some votes. What would you like?
No, I don't think, based on anything I heard, that we need to vote on anything. I think I'm hearing a lot of comments. We'll take those back and make sure we come back on the 21st. And, I think we'll compare notes in the morning. But I think I heard general consensus on most subjects. So I think there isn't a need for a vote. I think I'm writing down study sessions. Economic development, business development is definitely one. The utility piece is another. I think that we can sort of talk about undergrounding through utilities. I know it's a different subject, but I am hearing that we don't want to throw good money after bad. And we also, I can't remember who said it, but I do think consuming management time, someone mentioned that, and I do think that's another big factor. And so I do want to talk to John, and because these RFPs and all of this work, it is consuming. And if there was a consultant that does undergrounding and can do all the work, and we can just say, okay, here's some PG&E money, come back with something that's useful, then I think that's a good idea. But if it's going to consume John's time, I know at least we all, and I feel like there's higher priorities for your time. So I appreciate that comment, because I think that's sometimes lost in the, I guess, in the in all the numbers is the time that we need in order to get this organized. So, and I think the last thing at least I wanted to say, and we'll, like I said, capture the notes and come back on the 21st and hopefully hit the bullseye in terms of everything we heard. We did receive a public comment from the chamber, and I know that you get those distributed and it came in through email, but I thought Whitney did a nice job of explaining economic development from supporting two projects. One's the community center enhancements, the other one is the service parking lot. And so she, in essence, says it's not that obvious, but both projects support economic development because they support not only the back end, right? Because the back end of businesses is often like where all the work gets done, the back of the house, so to speak. But the front of the house, which is, our community center, is also, part of the reason people come visit us, right? And by doing what we're proposing and enhancing that area, this is where it's nice, where it supports residents and visitors alike, and I know that's always the balance we're trying to achieve. So having a community center in the heart of our town supports both, and I think is economic development. So I don't want us to get too sort of stuck on that term as something we're not doing, because I do feel like we do it every day. And I do think, all of you and the leadership of this community, I liked, I didn't know, I read in the paper that Jen Carvalho said Yountville starts with you, and I really liked that sort of statement. I never heard it until I read it in the Sun, but it's catchy, one, but I think it's also economic development to me, and I think of it that way. I think of, like, if we're talking about business attraction, like, I need to be working with landlords to fill spaces, and I know Whitney and I talk about that a lot, so just know that happens. It doesn't need to be a line item in the budget necessarily, but it does need to be a focus, and I do think it starts with all of us. So, we'll end by saying thanks to the staff and the community. I think this 2-year budget cycle has been a lot of work, but has gone well. And
Councilmember Reeves has another comment.
I felt like I was really putting
I know. Just before you're going to put the final wrap.
I'm sorry, but I just want to look back a little bit to our first session, and maybe these are just comments that are in general, but I just wanted to make sure that we have the money or the space in the budget to invest in this 3-bin protocol for trash, recycling, and yard waste, right? So that we make, I think that's also a business and a community development idea where we become much more of a conscious choice as far as people who are interested in sustainability, and we also educate our residents in how to do the sorting issues. So I want to make sure that we have that ability to do that. Everywhere should have 3 bins, and we should have a consistent statement of what goes in all of those bins, because everybody's got different pictures and everybody does it differently. So, I mean, as an ad hoc committee, we're going to meet with Upper Valley Disposal to see what our individual potential is for all of those bins, and also the foodware ordinance that we're reviewing has a component for the bins. So I feel like we need to have room in our budget for that kind of thing, whether it comes out of our franchise agreement money from UVDS or not, but we should have that. And then there was a budget item for mentoring for employees at different levels, and I just wanted to make sure that incorporated in that mentoring is the idea of customer service, because I think we are all in that business. We are up here in that business, and everybody who's employed in the town is in that business. We want our residents and visitors to feel noticed and understood, and so I think that's a component that we need to revisit always, and I'm hoping that that can be included in that mentoring component. And then one last thing, I think, let me just turn the page. Two last things. One is I'm hoping that the Arts Commission can look at an idea of the public art program that they are in charge of, also sort of going out into the residential areas, and perhaps when the Arts Commission is approached by an artist that wants to sell at a very deep discount to the town rather than move his sculpture, that we would be able to incorporate that into some budget item in the future for purchasing that art and placing it in neighborhood parks so that we all have access to an art walk. It's maybe not part of the published art walk for visitors, but it's part of the residential art walk. So I would like them to at least discuss that, and maybe it can be incorporated into the Arts Commission budget, which we have to discuss anyway because now we don't have that many impact fees for purchase for the art walk. And then I'd also like to see some kind of kiosk for bulletins and resident announcements in the community center. Maybe this can be incorporated into that enhancements budget item. But when I go to other communities, I love to look at telephone poles that are full of announcements. And yeah, we're probably not going to allow that in Yountville, but how about a cylindrical kiosk that allows people not to have to go to someone with a key to open up something that you don't actually qualify for being in, but that people can announce they have a yard sale or they're having a soiree or something that involves people coming to different places. Just is a community building idea that I think we would all benefit from. So if we can incorporate those things, I would think that would be great. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, you have the last word on the wrap.
That was it. I think I'll just tell you, I know John's looking at the 3 bins. We're learning from the big bellies. Mentoring, coaching, yes. Customer service is part of that. I'll lean on Sam to talk to the Public Art Committee about neighborhood art, and then we can talk about the kiosk or the bulletin board as well, both there. And obviously with the Commons, we have a new opportunity. So I heard you. I heard all of you. So we'll make sure we do our best to come back with some options on everything we heard today. So thank you again.
Okay, we're going to, hold on, let me get back to my agenda. Any closing comments? We'll skip that till the next meeting, and we'll entertain a motion to adjourn to our regular town council meeting today, May 7th at 3 p.m.
Mayor, I move to adjourn.
I second.
Let's get it
We
out
have
there.
motion by McKee-Cant and pick a second. Everybody seconded that. With that, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstain? All right. We are adjourned until 3 o'clock. Hold on one second. The red light's still on. The red light's still on.
Is that the Sonoma one or Napa Sonoma workbook?
This is what